Weeks ago, when the two prophecies of the gods had just begun to spread, somewhere among the high mountains, a woman was climbing a cliff, clinging to the rocks with her bare hands. She was swearing, repeating a phrase she was sure she had been teased with. Damn child. But this time, the damn child was not her, but the one who had set her up. Her palms were already shredded and blood was running down her arms. Judging by how well she was climbing, it looked like she had talent, but at the moment, she seemed to be in a predicament for more than just her injured hands. Her left ankle was badly swollen. The woman wiped the blood on her hands with her face and reached for the ledge. However, this was a mistake. The ledge was a cleverly hidden rock that tilted as the woman hung onto it and put her weight on it. Fortunately, the woman had a good sense of balance. The woman was Hui Kyung, Hui Seo's fourth child. At first, Hui Kyung thought everything was going well. She was used to the alienation of those around her, for she had grown up hearing words like cursed child and she ate her own mother. Hui Kyung grew up without the support of 4 families and her own father. She couldn't live proudly as a child of a lord, but none of that mattered to her. She knew there were many more people living in worse conditions. There was wilderness all around, and countless tribes fought for their own interests. On the other hand, there was order in automation. The order was maintained by 4 families. Although the interior of automation could not be called a paradise, being able to freely go in and out of the castle walls as a resident was beautiful in itself. To remain a resident of the castle, people had to do a great favor or dedicate a large amount of wealth to automation, and that was more difficult for species other than humans. So Hui Kyung decided to live using the last advantage she had, and that was business. Going in and out of the castle walls meant that one could sell goods inside that sold for next to nothing outside automation, but sold for high prices inside the castle walls, and vice versa. In order to do business, a certain amount of wealth had to be given to the lord, but Hui Kyung didn't mind. However, things did not go well again. Looking at her scattered silk goods, she wailed, "I can't believe the wheelbarrow wheel was broken. You bloody rascal, you dare to lend me such a thing. Maybe I won't repay you with salt." Hui Kyung, who continued to climb the rock, looked down for a moment. A few meters below lay a wrecked unicycle wheelbarrow. It was a miracle that after falling from the wheelbarrow, Hui Kyung had only suffered a sprained ankle and bruises all over her body. It wouldn't have been strange if she had lost her life, but Hui Kyung's thoughts were focused on something else. But it was a long way to climb back up the trail, and she had to work hard to get out. Hui Kyung reassuringly said to herself, "It's okay. Being patient is what I'm best at." And that injured ankle was just a minor inconvenience compared to what she was going through. The main thing was to figure out how to get upstairs, and the rest she could endure and bear any pain. Ever since she was a little girl, she had heard people say that she was cursed, all because of a pair of horns that grew on her forehead. They whispered amongst themselves loud enough for her to clearly hear her spoken of as the monster who killed her mother at birth. And even after she was born, accidents continued to happen around her ever since she was a little girl. Mishaps followed her one after another, some of them directly threatening her life. Once when she was 13, she fell down the steps of a store and nearly broke her neck. When she was 14, she was suddenly and unfairly accused of being a salt thief and jailed for 4 days. When she was 15, the boards underneath her broke and she fell into the city toilet. It was not a joke, but a really life-threatening situation. To drown in such a place is really a horrible death. Once, even a can of water just fell on her head out of nowhere. There was also a case where a pack of dogs chased her through the streets of the city all night. That was why something like this was nothing to her. She had been through much worse trouble. Shaking with anger, she screamed at herself. How could she have been so stupid? How could she have hoped to cross this mountainous narrow road with cart? Now because of her foolishness, she had lost all her silk. The mountains seemed impregnable, and there was nowhere to step. She had only to curse at these lifeless rocks. Finally calming herself down, she said, "It's all right. Being patient is what I'm best at." Hui Kyung took a deep breath and prepared herself for the pain. Aside from remembering her bleak past, Hui Kyung kept thinking about how she would collect the silk that was in the wheelbarrow as she climbed up the cliff. Because of this, she didn't notice that there was someone standing on top of the cliff she was climbing. Hui Kyung continued to climb, straining her injured body, and rested her hand on the last ledge of the cliff. She suddenly felt tired at the thought that this ledge would be the last one she would have to climb. Even if her body was in better condition, the climb would still be life-threatening. It would have been better if there had been a foothold here that she could have leaned on with her intact right leg to help herself up. But there wasn't. To get higher, she had to push off the ledge with both feet at the same time. But suddenly, as she was about to shift her weight onto her swollen left ankle, a voice came from above. "Take my hand." She was shocked. Not only did a stranger show up in these desolate mountains, but this was the first time in her life she was being offered help. She immediately suspected a trick. Making up her mind, Hui Kyung looked up. From the shadow cast by the rock, a hand was reaching down. It was a lizard man wearing several layers of silk clothing. Hui-kyung knew that these layers were used to maintain an ideal body temperature, as lizardmen are cold-blooded and sensitive to temperature fluctuations. But among all the lizardmen, there is only one tribe rich enough to wear silk clothes. In fact, she already knew what tribe this lizard man was from, even if it wasn't for the clothes. The lizard man had black scales, which was the trademark of the Rak tribe. The lizard from the black scale lizard tribe waved his hand and jokingly said, "Will you take my hand or not? My hand is getting lonely." Hui-kyung couldn't just reach out and grab a helping hand. She believed that it was because of her vigilance that she was still alive. Therefore, she first of all asked, who was she? And what was the lizard man doing here? But before answering her questions, the lizard man advised her to take his hand, as she was in no condition to have a long conversation right now. She didn't calm down and asked then, "Have you been following me all this time?" The lizard man answered her, "I think you'd rather take my hand and go upstairs to have a proper conversation than hang like this clinging to the rocks with your last strength." In answer to her last question of whether he was constantly following her, yes he was. Hui-kyung hesitated, even though she didn't think the lizard man would be a roving bandit. However, she had to consider the possibility that he might turn out to be a nasty stalker with unknown goals. Finally she said, "Even if you helped me up, I have nothing to give you in return. I'm broke." As if finding her concern funny, the lizard man asked, "Is that really what you think about when you're hanging over the abyss?" She replied, "Yes, because I can climb up on my own too. And I'm not going to ask for anything." "It's okay, because I won't ask anything," the lizard man said and leaned towards her. Hui-kyung smelled the unique scent of the lizard man's scales. Some people thought that lizard scales had a fishy smell, so they covered their nose, while others just thought of water and bushes. Hui-kyung belonged to the latter. When she hesitated, the lizard grabbed her wrist and pulled her up, and while she was still reeling from the surprise, she was lowered to the ground. She was surprised. Did he just pull me up with one arm? Now I understand why the lizards of the black-scale lizard tribe are called strong. The lizardman looked back and forth at the road by the cliff and asked, "This road is wide enough for a man to walk along. On one side of the road there could be a landslide at any moment, and on the other side is a valley with many meters of precipice. What were you thinking pushing a wheelbarrow full of stuff down a road like that? It's a good thing you only got away with that injury." But Hui-kyung was that it wouldn't have been a problem if it wasn't for the broken tire. The lizardman then reminded her that wheels could always break and cause problems, and she should always consider possible trouble and think ahead. Considering the current technological level of humans, the lizardman was completely right, and there was nothing she could object to. So she changed the subject and asked the lizardman what his name was. He politely apologized for not introducing himself yet, and said his name was Siren Mule of the black-scale lizard tribe. You may disregard the name Mule. It is a name that has been passed down, but neither I nor my father know what it means. It's not the most common name among lizardmen, but my father wanted me to keep it, so I always introduce myself as Siren Mule. You can just call me Siren." Hui-kyung nodded and said, "Okay, well I thought I should at least thank you since you helped me out." "Thank you, Siren." After thanking Siren, Hui-kyung tried to limp past him and continue on her way, but Siren blocked her way with his hand, saying, "We're not done here yet, Hui-kyung." She immediately froze in place, thinking, "Damn it, I knew this would happen. I told you, I have nothing. And how the hell does he know my name?" When Siren said her name, she reached for the obsidian knife hidden in her clothes. Hui-kyung knew that her identity must not be revealed. Hui-seo, who had led automation after his mother, had decided to lead automation differently after her murder. He decided to hide his identity. He revealed his true identity only to the members of the 4 trusted families in the castle. They served as his hands and feet, and at the same time had to keep a vigilant eye on each other. Such a life came with a certain amount of risk, but Hui-seo managed to settle things within his means. Hui-seo also wanted his children's identities hidden, and the children had to follow his orders. If they didn't make enough effort to hide their identities, they wouldn't be able to become successors, wouldn't get their father's attention, and might die prematurely. Hui-kyung knew that black-scale lizards were strong, but her obsidian knife was sharp and long enough to pierce its heart. Instinctively, she almost snatched the knife, but she refrained from doing so at the moment. Hui-kyung thought, "Even if I do use the knife, I need to find out how he knows my name first. No matter what, I'll use my knife after I get information from him. And definitely not because he helped me." So she first asked how he knew her name. Siren showed both palms, making it clear that he had no intention of getting into trouble and wasn't going to fight. He simply replied that Rakrak told him her name, and then ordered him to find her. "Rakrak, chief of the black-scale tribe?" she interjected. Hearing that name, her jaw dropped with a mixture of fear, reverence, and surprise. Hui-kyung recognized the familiar name. It didn't take her long to realize who he was talking about. But she continued to clarify. Are you talking about the hunter Rakrak? The thunder lizard? The first chosen one? The leader of the black-scale lizard tribe? To all this, Sairan replied that, we just call him Chief. Rumors reached Hui-kyung that the tribe of severed ears and the tribe of black-scale lizards were preparing for a battle in the desert. This rumor was spread among the people of automation, as they were the center of this entire fight, and their fate depended on the outcome of their eventual battle. If Saren wasn't lying, finding out how Rakrak had gotten her name for Hui, Kyung wasn't that important. Black-scale lizards would do anything to find out. The next question was far more important. Why would someone so famous and powerful ask to find her? She immediately asked the lizardman this question. To be honest, I don't know exactly myself, but I think I can try to explain part of the reason to you. Saren gathered his thoughts and asked, are you aware of 2 recent rumors that have spread throughout automation and the entire peninsula? About what? That the second son of the De family excelled at horseback riding, or that the Su family's second daughter gave birth to twins, or that the fishmonger finally brought live fish to the market? Hearing the last of the rumors, Saren asked if it was even real. Hui-kyung immediately reassured, no, over. I checked it out. It's all lies. All fish are salted. The lizardman then said, well, anyway, I wasn't talking about some petty rumors like that. You should have guessed it. Even I, an outsider, heard about it. Haven't you been to automation lately? She had been, and she replied, I haven't been there. I needed to buy silk, and I went as far as I could to get it at a cheap price. I was lucky enough to find a man from whom I could buy silk. So what is this rumor you speak of? Saren replied, more precisely, there are 2 rumors. One says that the Lord's second child will become the next Lord of Automation, and the other says that the 4th child will become the next Lord of Automation. Hearing this, Hui-kyung frowned for a moment, and exhaling a sigh of relief, she skeptically said that these were all false rumors. But Saren didn't share her skepticism and stated, I know you're Huiseo's 4th child. Hui-kyung shook her head. I guess you don't understand because you're not human and you don't live in automation. But fighting doesn't necessarily mean knife fighting. These rumors are part of a fight between my siblings who are trying to become the next Lord of Automation. I'm not sure exactly why, but my second brother and I seem to be caught up in these rumors, and I'm sure there will be someone who will benefit from it. I'm just an outcast with no chance of being my father's heir. There's nothing you can get out of me. It would have been better for you to look into another sibling. My first brother and older sister aren't the type to spread false rumors. I don't think they did it. Then it was probably my second brother or my younger sister. But my younger sister is too young for something like that, so she couldn't have done it. My other brother is probably behind it. He always likes to make things up behind other people's backs. He probably wanted to make himself the victim of false rumors, but he thought he'd draw too much attention to himself, so he dragged me into it. How childish. Finally, Hui-kyung said, Anyway, these rumors have nothing to do with me or you. Why don't you just say that the black-scale lizard tribe sent you to get information about automation? It seems you somehow found out that I'm one of the Lord's children, but I'm an outcast. You can't get anything out of me. It would be better for you to look for another sibling of mine. Hui-kyung finished her speech and watched Saren's reaction, and since she had learned everything she wanted from the lizard man, he had to die. Hui-kyung gripped the hilt of her knife tightly. Even though Saren was just standing still, there seemed to be no place where Hui-kyung could strike. And because of the height difference, Hui-kyung thought she couldn't reach him. Being strong didn't mean being fast, and maybe she had a chance. But Hui-kyung already knew that the probability of failure was higher than the probability of success if she attacked the lizard man. What if she succeeded in killing him? He knows exactly who she is, and he was sent specifically to her. So if she kills him, then she will incur the wrath of the black-scale lizard tribe, which had the most incredible rumors about it. However, she also couldn't just let Saren go. If word spread that she had let the stranger go, even when she had the chance to stop him, and especially if her father found out, she would disappoint him greatly and possibly be awarded the death penalty for it. So she decided it was better to try and kill this lizard man and die than to live with her father's disappointment. Seeing her intentions, Saren lowered his gaze and turned to Hui-kyung. I think you misunderstood something. Seeking you was Rakrak's first order, but I also have to fulfill the second command as well. The second command I received was to protect you and your life at all costs. Hui-kyung was surprised and felt an unpleasant feeling somewhere in the back of her mind. It was a feeling she had ignored for a long time because others ignored her. It was strange, and since she hadn't experienced it in a long time, she couldn't give it a name. Hui-kyung decided that she didn't want to know what the feeling was, but somewhere in the back of her mind, she heard a voice. One that asked, Do you want me to tell you what it is? It's called warmth. The warmth of someone caring about you. Did my heart become tender to this lizard man I met just a moment ago just because he said those words? But it was inevitable. As far back as Hui-kyung could remember, no one had ever offered her protection. She had already loosened her grip on the hilt of her knife. Hui-kyung wasn't about to stab someone who said he would protect her. She had always thought of herself as strict, but those who remembered her thought of her as someone who became weak when it came to affection. Finally coming to her senses a little, Hui-kyung stuttered and asked, "What? What are you talking about?" Saren didn't know much about human emotions, so he calmly told her what he knew. "You said it was a false rumor, but your siblings don't think so, nor do the other families. Chief Rakrak said that the automation succession ceremony is coming up. Everyone is paying attention to the big changes coming. Therefore, people will be sensitive to even the smallest rumors and will want to cut down on unnecessary variables. Given the circumstances, the weakest ones will be eliminated first, and you will definitely be the target of an assassination attempt and more than one on your life." While Saren was talking, Hui-kyung pulled herself together and said, "Even if I agree with everything you just said, I can defend myself on my own, so go back to where you came from. I have no reason to get help from the black-scale lizard tribe, and like I said, I have nothing to offer you in return. Look for another brother or sister." But Saren answered her calmly, "I cannot do that. The tribal chief has ordered me to protect you specifically, and neither I nor the tribal leader wants anything from you, except to keep you alive." Hui-kyung sighed. She realized that logic would not make the lizard go away, so she would have to resort to emotion. She didn't want to tell him so much, but what could she do? Hui-kyung let go of the knife and walked closer to Siren. He was surprised when Hui-kyung came up to him empty-handed and said, "Look at this." Hui-kyung lifted her bangs with her hand. There were a pair of cylindrical bumps on her forehead. The cross-section was so uneven that any keen eye could see that they had been cut off by her hands. As you have already realized, these are horns. More precisely, the parts where the horns used to be. Horn stumps, you might say. "Do they grow back?" Saren asked. Hui-kyung nodded and said, "Yes, that's why I trim them when they grow long. Everyone who knows me says I'm cursed because of these horns. There are some who say that simply because they find it distasteful that a person has horns, but those who know me well avoid and hate me even more, because I am truly cursed." Saren, glancing at Hui-kyung every now and then, said, "You look a bit scruffy, but it's not like you're cursed. Do people really hate you just because of those cute horns?" But she sadly replied, "I'm not kidding." Hui-kyung pointed at her horns and continued to say, "I was born by tearing my mother's belly with these horns, and because of that, she died. One of my half-brothers also eventually died because of my horns. In addition, misfortunes are constantly happening to those around me. That's the real reason why I'm a loner." Saren lowered his sad gaze to Hui-kyung for a moment and said, "I'm sorry to hear that, Hui-kyung. Please accept my condolences. But my mission does not depend on whether you are cursed or not. The mission has been entrusted to me by the tribe chief, and I am here to fulfill the will of the black-scale lizard tribe. And even if you refuse, I will still protect you. I have the desire and the ability to do so." After the failed attempt to make Saren afraid, Hui-kyung had run out of ideas on how to make him leave, and she began to ponder. Would the only way to get rid of him be to make him experience my curse? If that was the case, Hui-kyung realized that she would have no choice but to go along with Siran. So she would have to go with this big, strong, powerful warrior from the Lizardmen tribe who says he will protect her life. Hui-kyung was not unfamiliar with Lizardmen. There were few of them in automation. However, even in her eyes, Saren was different from other Lizardmen. Not only because of the precious clothes he was wearing, but also because of the muscles visible under Saren's scales and the dignity evident in his demeanor. Even though Hui-kyung had to hide her identity from others and didn't even like the fact that she was the daughter of a lord, she still belonged to high society. But even she felt uncomfortable looking at Saren. After thinking for a bit, she came to a conclusion. Well, it's not really that bad, is it? Hui-kyung quickly thought in her mind. She couldn't just send Saren away like that, because then she would have to kill him. But there was a very small chance that she would be able to do so. And even if Saren spared Hui-kyung's life, she would have to risk letting go of someone who knew her true identity. On the other hand, if Saren stayed by her side, she wouldn't have to kill him, and she herself would be able to prevent the risk of her identity being revealed to others. There was nothing wrong with Saren being with her, rather it was even a good thing. After all, he had even said that he would protect her. That meant that he would take action and help her if she got into a dangerous situation. While Hui-kyung was pondering without saying a word, Siren, unable to stand the silence, asked, "Hui-kyung, what are you thinking about?" And she replied that she was thinking about silk. And now that she was thinking about it, she realized that she couldn't just leave all that silk down there. She needed to go back downstairs, which she was going to do. Saren sighed as Hui Kyung staggered to the edge of the cliff and stood there. He snickered. People will praise you for being able to climb up the cliff with an injured leg, but they'll say you're crazy to climb back down. I know that, and you know it too. I'd stop you, and you'd object that you really need that silk. However, there's a better way to get people to do things for you. You just have to ask for help. Hui Kyung's face turned red at Saren's suggestion. She was used to relying only on herself. Seeing her indecision, Saren said, I don't blame you. After all, you became like this because of the curse. I am just trying to convey to you that there is a better way of doing things. I have come to protect you, and there are many things I could help you with. One of those things is to help you not starve to death, and to do that, you need to bring back the silk. Hui Kyung looked away embarrassed and finally asked quietly, Please help me. Help me get that silk. Saren started climbing up the rock and slid down the rest of the steep slope. He then tied the bundle of silk around his torso and climbed back up. It took less than a minute for Saren to climb back up. He quickly gathered up all the bundles of silk, as if it was no big deal and they were light as feathers, and they headed off to automation together. Hui Kyung decided she should know more and asked, So you're not a warrior? I've heard that warriors of the black-scale lizard tribe wear water buffalo skulls on their heads. But Saren assured her, I am a warrior too, but nowadays we don't wear buffalo skulls often, only if there is some ritual, though Chief Rakrak still usually wears them. But it is also true that I am one of Mrs. Jael's errand boys. I learned from Lady Jael how to identify medicinal herbs and treat the wounded, and when I grew older, I took the warrior's exam and learned to use spears and shoot arrows from Mr. Ure. He is the best warrior of our tribe. Hui Kyung nodded as if it didn't matter much, but she understood that Saren wasn't just a lizard warrior that Rakrak had decided to send. He used to be an errand boy for someone who handled the inner workings of the tribe, and then he learned weapons from the best warrior. There was more to learn. So she asked how did he even know she was here? Saren replied, I just went to automation and asked around there, using your fake name Mangji. It fits you better than Hui Kyung, doesn't it? She replied, I think so too. But I don't think information about me would have been given out so easily. I have bad relationships with people, but I'm sure my business partners wouldn't sell me so easily and cheaply. Saren laughed. If that were the case, how would I have found you? Everyone I asked told me everything as soon as I gave them a pocketful of salt. They told me that you've been going into the silk business for a long time, that they didn't know where you'd find silk since the rainy season was coming soon, and that they wondered how you'd bring in enough silk yourself to make a profit. They also told me that you borrowed a wheelbarrow from them to start your silk business, but did not return, and they thought you had cheated them. They also told me that you left automation through the back gate of the castle, and so on. Don't you think you've lost too much of your business partner's trust, aside from other human relationships? Hui Kyung couldn't lift her head from how screwed up she was. Her face was red all the way to her ears. The journey back to automation took a whole day when they finally saw automation's rampart. The rampart was shorter than the one Hui Kyung had fallen from, but the artificially created fortress was different from the natural one. The fortress was long and disappeared into the cliffs on both sides. Automation was obstructed by a rampart in front, while the castle was further away and surrounded by sheer cliffs on both sides. At the front of the rampart was the main gate through which people entered and exited, and at the back of the rampart was a smaller gate. The path that Hui Kyung and Saren followed led to the back gate and was a secret path. Only a few merchants knew about it. Now that they were almost there, Saren asked, What are you going to do now? I think it is too late for selling silk. Hui Kyung said that the market should still be open, but first she should meet the Geo family and talk to them, since it was one of them who had lent her the faulty car, which she'll have to pay for now. While they were talking so calmly, the menace was approaching them from behind. It was only because of Saran's excellent reaction that Hui Kyung survived. The dagger was fired accurately at her back, but hit the hand of the lizardman who had sacrificed it to protect the girl. The dagger pierced through the palm of his hand and blood nearly covered the terrified Hui Kyung. Saren, writhing the dagger in his hand, said, Just as Mr. Rakrak said, you are being hunted. One of your business associates has probably uncovered everything you've been up to, and the gatekeeper or someone else has reported how you left the castle and how you're likely to return. The battle for the air had begun, and then the attackers revealed themselves. They were a band of goblin mercenaries who specialized in assassinations for hire, a kind of prehistoric assassins. They had no chance against the lizard man one-on-one, but they had the advantage in numbers that gave them hope of victory. However, despite their numerical advantage, it was not surprising that in a few moments the entire goblin squad was defeated and bound with a piece of silk cloth that Saren had borrowed from Hui Kyung. Interrogating them, they learned that the masked man had ordered them to kill Hui Kyung and told them where to wait for her and how she looked, but they didn't know any more. Instead of killing the goblins, which at first glance seemed like a logical step, Saren decided that the goblins could be useful in another way. At the same time, Hui Kyung couldn't stop marveling at how good a lizardman was at fighting. She said that she had heard that the most famous warrior among the lizardmen was their battlemaster Ur. Saren, while bandaging the wounds of the goblins, confirmed her words. Indeed, Ur was the best warrior of their tribe. And Saren had personally learned battle techniques from him. Hearing this, Hui Kyung looked at how he treated the goblins with interest, and asked if he had learned these healing techniques from Ur too? But Saren replied that of course not. He learned how to heal others from Jaeol when he worked as her errand boy. The more he told about himself, the more it became clear to Hui Kyung that he was no ordinary lizardman. Jaeol is the one in charge of the Black-Scale tribe's internal affairs and is Rakrak's wife. Being her errand boy means that he was under Jaeol's supervision, and the fact that he learned to fight from Ur meant that he holds an important position in the Black-Scale tribe. In the end, the fact that someone as high-ranking as him had come to protect her meant that she was indeed very important to their tribe. All she had to do was find out why. But even without knowing their true motives, she could extract a lot of benefits for herself and make it her advantage. But all her thoughts of using the lizard were blown away when she saw Saren give her precious silk to the goblins who had nearly killed her. She immediately screamed in outrage. It was her silk, which she had obtained with her own sweat and blood, and he was giving it to assassins. But Saren assured her it was to placate them. Once they were paid, they would calm down and there would be no more attacks from these particular goblins. Giving up a small piece of silk for that, a small price to pay. Hui Kyung suspected that the one who ordered the goblins to attack her was her first brother Hui Dan, who was supported by the Geo family, but the goblins denied it and it wasn't really true. And here's why. As they approached the gates of automation, they saw a whole group of merchants who couldn't get in and were piled up laden with their wares at the entrance. Looking closely, Hui Kyung noted that the gates of the castle are closed, and the guards would not let anyone inside, regardless of race or merchandise. This meant that something unusual was going on in the castle. When they got closer, they asked one merchant what had happened and why the gates of Automation Castle were closed. Seeing their load of silk, Foxman assured her that she, as a silk merchant, would not be able to enter either. Neither would everyone else. The doors were closed right in front of their noses for a while, and guards didn't say why or when they would be reopened. And even if someone who was an Automation citizen was let in, they were still not let out again. Trading was the main activity in Automation, and if they closed the gates to all traders, then something really serious had happened in the castle. Hui Kyung, as one of the heiresses, was of course allowed in, and Saren with her. But they were warned that they would not be able to leave Automation until they were ordered to do so. Everything came to a head during the visit to the Zhou family, where Hui Kyung went first. The head of the Zhou family was in a bad mood and reluctantly agreed to talk to her. It was obvious that he had much more important things to worry about than meeting her. Seeing that, Hui Kyung asked what was wrong with his expression. She should be the one being angry here, not him. Sipping her tea, she said, "Gyo-jung, I almost died because the cart you lent me broke." He only replied tiredly, "It seems you haven't heard anything yet." "Well, whatever. Did nothing particular happen on the way here?" This question surprised her a little, but she decided to answer honestly that it was a failed assassination attempt. Luckily, she had a warrior from the Black-Scale Lizard tribe with her, who had saved her and defeated her attackers. She pointed directly at Siren, who introduced himself to the head of the Geo house as Siren Muel from the Black-Scale tribe. Gyo-jung had not yet met the members of this tribe in person and was glad to meet them. He in turn introduced himself as Gyo-jung, the leader of the Geo family, one of the 4 families of the Automation Castle. Saren said that after they had defeated the goblins whose attempt to kill Hui Kyung had failed, they had interrogated them, and learned from them that the Gyo family was not involved in the assassination attempt. At least that's what they said. Gyo-jung confirmed their words, saying that of course their family was not involved. After all, they never did any dirty tricks like other families. Hui Kyung didn't believe him yet and asked with a strained smile, "Really? So what happened in the Automation Castle? I don't think it's because the cursed 4th daughter was ambushed. All the castle residents were locked inside." Gyo-jung replied with a stone face, "An assassination attempt occurred here inside the castle too." Hui Kyung was shocked by what she heard. An assassination attempt occurred here inside the castle, where everything seemed to be safe. Gyo-jung continued, "Now that the castle lord has left, a leading heir of the Automation Castle, your brother, Hui Dan, went missing." It turned out that the Geo and Wu Sun families, who supported Hui Dan, suspected the other 2 families of being involved in Hui Dan's disappearance. But there was no proof, and no corpse either, so all the families supported the decision to close the castle gates until proof was found. Gyo-jung even allowed Hui Kyung to visit the room where Hui Dan disappeared from, so she could see for herself with her own eyes. She and Saren looked around the room carefully, hoping to find anything that would indicate what had happened to her brother. Looking around the room, Hui Kyung noticed how things had changed since the last time she had been here. As a child, she had been quite close to him, closer than any of her other siblings, as he treated her better than anyone else despite her curse. But as she grew older, she herself began to avoid direct contact with her older brother and became more and more withdrawn. While she was reminiscing, Saren, thanks to his good sense of smell and attention, noticed something near the table leg. He recognized it unmistakably. He immediately called Hui Kyung to him, saying that there was a strong odor of blood coming from that spot. Indeed, there was a faint spot of blood on the table leg below, and the table was on the carpet. As soon as they picked it up, there were distinct streaks of blood underneath. A lot of blood. The marks were distinct despite the fact that someone had tried to cover them up and wipe them away. The puddle of blood was still too big, and hiding it was not possible. When they went back to Gyo-jung and told him about their find, he wasn't surprised at all and calmly replied that Hui-dan was probably dead. They found that evidence too. The only problem that remained was that they couldn't find his corpse. As they say, no body, no crime. That's why after they found those traces of blood, they decided to lock the castle gates, so the culprit wouldn't be able to take the corpse out of the castle. They hoped that the corpse would begin to decompose and its odor would spread through the castle. Following the trail of the corpse odor, it would only be a matter of time before they caught the culprit. Looking at Hui Kyung, Gyo-jung finally summarized that this is why she shouldn't take any action. They will handle everything themselves. She'd better think about her own safety and lay low. But Hui Kyung was not the kind of person who would sit idly by. She couldn't sit on the sidelines even if she wanted to. She immediately started thinking, would the culprit really not have considered that much before committing the murder? No, let's not think about this too deeply. As Gyo-jung said, there's no need for me to take action. Suddenly she heard a voice inside, a terrible and familiar voice, one that made every cell in her body shake in terror. It was the voice of her horned curse, which expressed itself not only in the horns on her head, but also in the insidious spirit within, which, of course, no one but herself knew about. He asked, should I tell you? Are you really just going to sit there and do nothing again? Hui Kyung tried to shut that voice out, but she was having no success. Her inner struggle was visible even from the outside, and Saren even started to worry about her, asking if she was okay. But she was silent in response, and her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. She seemed resigned and strained to listen to advice from somewhere deep inside. She finally came to her senses and immediately asked the head of the Gyo house a strange question. Gyo-jung, what kind of person possesses a pot big enough for a corpse to be stored in without being suspected? He was surprised by the question and asked her which pot she meant. Then she clarified that she meant a pot where meat could be stored without rotting. But it wasn't Gyo-jung who answered her, but Sairan. He suggested that a butcher or a hunter might have such pots, but he wondered why she was asking. He finally realized what she meant. Someone who had such a pot could store meat, any meat, including human meat, and keep it from rotting for a long time. Hui Kyung confirmed his hunch. In such a pot with meat, it was only necessary to add enough lily and it could be preserved for a very long time, long enough to get rid of the corpse without a trace. Someone who can easily take a hunter around with them in the castle. Someone who has a lot of meat preserved in salt within the pots at their home. Now Gyo-jung realized what she was getting at, and he finished her logical chain of reasoning by adding that it was someone who could naturally visit this office. Someone very familiar to everyone. Someone who could just walk into Hui-dan's office. It could only be one person, who was just now completing the disguise of the evidence of his crime. Securely closing the pot lid and smiling smugly, confident that he would never be caught, thanks to his ingenious plan. The killer was a hunter and possible successor of the Automation Castle, the second child of the Lord, Hui Jin. All that's left is to catch her, along with all the evidence. Hui Kyung's reasoning was very convincing and logical. Therefore, even though only a few people inside the castle were informed about the name of the likely culprit who committed the murder according to Hui Kyung's reasoning, the rumors spread very quickly. And when Hui-dan's death was officially announced and the sad news became known to everyone in the castle, everyone already knew that the main suspect was Hui Jin. Her cunning plan was revealed, and she had no choice but to flee. Escape from the castle at night and under the cover of darkness. On the way, she couldn't stop cursing. Damn it, how the hell did this happen? Hui Jin thought it was a brilliant and perfect plan that guaranteed her success without consequences. But in fact, it turned out to be wrong, and her perfect plan crashed into the harsh reality, and the heavy body bag on her back was solid proof of that. She wasn't alone. She had her faithful assistant with her, who was carrying the other part of the corpse. They had already traveled far enough away from automation and up into the mountains that towered above the castle. They thought they could relax a little and no longer fear the chase. But Hui Jin did not calm down and continued to wonder how that damned girl Hui Kyung managed to reveal her plans. She'd never thought she'd be capable of such a thing. Suddenly, someone answered her wails, and it wasn't her assistant, who had remained silent the whole way. A young voice came from above and asked Hui Jin, "Isn't there someone else you neglected?" This voice was very familiar to her, for it was her younger sister, Hui Min. She was standing on a ledge and smiling strangely. Looking at her and realizing what was about to happen, Hui Jin asked in despair, "How did we get here?" At the same time, the archers behind Hui Min's back were already preparing to fire their bows. Instead of answering, Hui Jin's companion received a very graphic demonstration of what was in store for her in the near future. She looked at her sister with anger and could only growl through gritted teeth. Hui Min seemed to like what was happening. She asked Hui Jin with her frightening smile, "Why are you so angry? Didn't you kill Brother Dan first? So even if I do something to you, you have no right to be so angry, unless it's at herself, because you are the one who started the bloodshed. The smartest among the brothers gets to be the lord of the castle. It's all for the throne, isn't it?" In Hui Min's opinion, she was the smartest and deserved to be the next lord, and she was willing to do anything for that. She especially wanted to put an end to this cursed brotherhood right now, and the two warriors behind her back were ready to do her bidding. Hui Jin only had time to shout the name of her despicable sister, who was just like her. That scream was the last one she would ever make, because in the next instant, 2 arrows struck her in the head and chest, leaving her no chance of survival. She fell to the ground as dead weight as her brother in the sack. Hui Min stopped playing her part and sadly watched as her warriors went to check what was in the sacks and make sure everyone there was dead. She pondered how one bloodshed leads to another, and what a small price to pay for the life of a potential heir to the throne. She didn't want to kill her siblings, but she realized she had no other choice. If she did it first, she would probably end up in Hui Jin's place. Suddenly, all her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden pain, and the horrible realization that she herself had been tricked. The huntress herself had been victimized, and while she was ambushing her sister, someone had ambushed her. The sword that pierced Hui Min's chest was sharp and merciless. She didn't even hear the stranger coming up behind her. She didn't even feel the slightest danger. Coughing up blood as the sword was pulled out of her, she heard the familiar voice of her brother. He was someone she hadn't expected to be here at all. So with surprise on her face, she died. Standing over her falling corpse, Hui Jun repeated her words, "It's time to put an end to this cursed brotherhood." He pushed his sister's corpse off the cliff and looked at the 3 corpses lying below and declared that now, from all his siblings, only one left. The blood of the Hui family flowed like a river that night. And the controversial prophecy began to be fulfilled, if only in that the next Lord of Automation would be Hui Jun or Hui Kyung. There were simply no other options left. Hui Jun was not going to stop there and promised, "I won't make you wait long, Hui Kyung." It seemed that by gambling on him, Hegemony had chosen the most dangerous and cunning of the heirs. Soon, the news that the corpses of 3 of the Lord's children had been found outside the walls of Automation shook the entire castle. Hui Kyung was also shocked that Hui Jin and Hui Min were found dead near the body of their older brother, Hui Dan. The head of the Jiao family said that all this means that the culprit has no intention of hiding his identity. Otherwise, he would have hidden the corpses better, or at least left them in different places. It was all too obvious. So much so that even a fool would have realized who was behind all this and who would benefit from it. Everyone present agreed that it was Hui Jun, and Hui Kyung went even further, suggesting that he had waited until the last minute for the right moment. When Hui Jin made her move first, it in turn forced Hui Min to act. He watched everything from afar and with superior knowledge of both situations. Finally, he waited for the right moment to get rid of the 2 of them at once and for all. Then if the attack of the hired goblins was the work of Hui Jun, then everything was clear and fell into place. If Saren hadn't shown up then, no doubt Hui Kyung would have been dead long ago. Moreover, everyone would have thought it was a robbery, not a contract killing, and Hui Jun would have been beyond suspicion. Gyo Jung, realizing all this, warned her that it was now that the real threat would begin. She realized it herself. She had already made up her mind to do her best. But the head of the family, Gyo, did not hurry to voice his thoughts and intentions about who his family will support in this struggle for the title of Lord. However, he revealed, "Actually, there was just a meeting inside the Gyo family, and we came to a common decision." At that moment, Hui Kyung froze and tensed up, listening intently to his every word, and staring at his every move. What she saw calmed her down, and she calmly finished her tea. Then she asked, "So, what is the decision of the Gyo family?" Gyo Jung pretended to hesitate and asked, "Isn't it obvious that Hui Jun is dominating the scene right now?" "So?" Hui Kyung looked at him carefully again. She was well aware that her fate was being decided right now. If none of the family supported her, things would go badly, and her days inside the castle would be numbered. Fortunately, the Gyo family decided to take a gamble on Hui Kyung. Now she at least had a chance. She bowed to him and thanked him for recognizing her as the likely future heiress to the Lord's title. But Gyo Jung assured her that it's a decision made based on calculation, not recognition. Though such details didn't matter much to Hui Kyung, at least that's what she pretended. In parting, Gyo Jung told her, "So by all means survive. Don't let me and my family down. Hui Kyung assured him that she would try and went to her home, accompanied by Seiran. Gyo-jung stayed at his place and quietly drank tea as if nothing had happened. Walking through the plaza, Hui Kyung told Seiran that she had to survive. Survive even despite her cursed body. After all, for the first time in her life, it felt like she had a few people she trusted and who trusted her. A few weeks passed and her horns grew back very quickly, and today the noise around her was already giving her a headache. She had been doing well with her main task of surviving for the past few weeks, and had even managed to hire additional guards. The same goblins who had tried to kill her. But they remembered the mercy shown to them and for a decent fee became no less worthy bodyguards. Hui Kyung was at the regular Geo family council and now a member of the family was speaking, who still couldn't calm down and claimed that simply avoiding assassination isn't the answer. Instead, they should make an effort to catch Hui Jun and bring him to justice. Another family member countered him on that and said that the Sang and Tu families are together on Hui Jun's side, so it will be much harder to do than say. As long as he is under their protection, it will be hard to bring him to justice without starting a war between the families, and the two families would have a significant numerical advantage in a war against them. At that time, another man offered to enlist the support of the Su family to even out the balance of power. After all, this family had yet to openly declare their support for anyone else. They continued to argue until Hui Kyung, along with her headache, had a strange feeling as if she was in danger and another trouble was coming her way. And in addition to all these damn horns constantly interfered with her and they constantly wanted to pull out or cut. The discussion went on and someone suggested that they didn't really need the Su family's support. He was immediately told that there were two families and they were alone. So why is he saying that they don't need the support of another family? At the same time, Seiran told her, "Don't even think about cutting your horns." She assured him that she wasn't going to do that and it wasn't about them right now. Seiran, remembering how she had cut her horns, was still shocked at how much blood there had been then. If he had known then, he wouldn't have even let her try. But what surprised him the most was that she had trimmed them herself all the time before. Just how much she hated them was hard to imagine. Hui Kyung assured her once again that everything was fine. And stopped talking about her horns. There were more important things to do right now. She could feel it. Though if they talk about horns, comparing her situation 15 days ago and now, she can say that she still can't get used to those horns. But now she has come to accept them and sees her horns as a reward for overcoming many hardships over the past few weeks. Suddenly, a messenger came running to them with news from outside the castle. The messenger was in a great hurry and worried. He started talking, barely catching his breath. The news was simple. The Lord was finally returning to the castle. Everyone immediately began to discuss Lord Huiseo's return, for it solved a lot of their problems. All they had to do was wait for his arrival. Hui Kyung asked when he would arrive. The messenger replied that the Lord was traveling slowly and not too fast. Therefore, he will arrive at the castle not earlier than tomorrow morning. Then the messenger came a little closer to Hui Kyung and said that there was also news that the scouting party told him to deliver personally only for Hui Kyung. He moved even closer to her and leaned over her ear when she asked what it was. Then suddenly, blood splattered on her face. The blood of the messenger. He was pierced by two blades at once on both sides from Seiran and the goblin. The messenger immediately let go of the knife he was about to kill Hui Kyung with, if given literally a moment more time. Hui Kyung looked at that knife and couldn't believe her eyes. How and why? What made the messenger take such a suicidal step? After all, he was a respected and trusted member of the Geo family himself. Seiran explained to everyone present who were puzzled that the messenger was trying to pull the knife out of his pocket. The simplest explanation voiced by Gyo-jung was that that guy had simply been bribed. Greed had always been a human weakness, and now they probably couldn't even trust Gyo's family members. Suddenly, all of this lost importance when the goblin who had looked out to see the commotion outside flew back into the room. He shouted for everyone to hurry up and run out of here now. Gyo-jung repeated the same thing only more specifically. Run away, Hui Kyung. Everything was clear now. Apparently Hui Jun had already made the decision to attack before the Lord arrived. He knew that when he returned, things would be much more complicated, and Hui Kyung would have all the trump cards in her hands. So he, along with the families supporting him, planned to end things here and now. And now, the war between the families had begun. So, Hui Kyung was forced to flee, and to be honest, she'd hoped she'd never have to use this escape route. But looking at this stinky hole, she realized there was just no other way. There is just no escape route as safe as this one. And even though it's gross and unpleasant, there's nothing else they can do. The sewer. How many times has it served as the last escape route for the heroes in a desperate situation, and this time was no exception. Seiran reminds Hui Kyung once again that under the circumstances, they simply have no other options. So Hui Kyung, without thinking long, started to go down into the hole, intending to go first. She disappeared down the hole, but Seiran didn't follow her. She had to come back to wave to him and ask him what he was doing. There was no time to delay. They had to hurry. Finally, Saren came down after her and closed the hatch behind him. When he smelled the disgusting stench that almost made him vomit, he noticed how well Hui-kyung was holding up. It seemed her stomach was much stronger than he thought. Hui-kyung didn't want to go into details about her troubled past at first, and just said that she was used to stink bugs. But Saren wanted to hear her whole story, and she couldn't get out of it. She had to tell him that when she was little, once she went to the bathroom and ended up falling into it. It wasn't a very long story, but it was disgusting. Just like this sewer they were walking through. Saren still didn't calm down and kept bothering her with questions, asking, "Isn't that a lot more dangerous than you made it sound like?" She replied that it was. She had almost died there. She must have fallen in there because of the rickety and flimsy loose floorboards, and got stuck up to her neck in a pile of shit. Luckily, somehow she managed to roll all the way to the sewer without getting hurt. There wasn't a single ray of light, and she thought she was going to die. When there was no hope and she was ready to give up, she saw light balls floating around. Then she followed the light and saw the dim outline of the sewer. She followed the light and even caught one. It turned out to be a bug with light coming from its tail. Perhaps that would have been a firefly. But not everything in the story was possible, which Saren noticed. He pointed out to her that fireflies were not the kind of bugs that normally lived in places like this. However, Hui-kyung continued to stand her ground. After all, they were really there, and she remembered everything clearly. Why wouldn't he believe her when she even said that she had caught one and got a good look at it? Saren thought about it. It was an interesting fact of her biography. The fact that the fireflies were in a place they usually weren't meant that there was interference from higher powers, perhaps even their blue beetle god. But he wasn't going to argue with Hui-kyung and agreed that it could have been anything. Perhaps even some other kind of firefly that was unfamiliar to him. Finally, they came to the exit of the sewer. A lone wooden door with rickety steps leading up to it. Saren pointed to this particular door and said that he had found it while exploring the sewer. It leads directly to the basement of the hunter's hut of the Su family. Saren was going to go first, but at the same time he asked Hui-kyung to wait here, just in case, and if he himself didn't return after a while. She would have to run immediately and in the opposite direction of the door. She must not even think of paying attention to whatever she hears outside. Her mission would be to flee and save the most precious thing at the moment. Her life. Hui-kyung pretended to agree and remained alone at the foot of the steps. The stench around her was getting annoying, but she had to wait. She waited for Saren to signal for her to come out, thinking she was still alive because of him and his caution. He'd saved her life more than once in the few fights she'd had in the last 3 weeks, which had been full of events. Right now, all she had to do was wait quietly here. Suddenly, a sound from above took away all her calm. There was no doubt that a fight had broken out upstairs. Hui-kyung knew that sound very well, and despite her promises to run back to the sewers if anything happened, she did the opposite and ran upstairs. She once again remembered what Saren had told her, but she wasn't going to stop. She was determined to help him in any way she could. She pulled out the hidden dagger and opened the doors. As she continued to run forward, she wondered, "Damn it, why am I doing this? Why am I not listening to what I was told?" Unexpectedly, the answer came on its own. She just didn't want to just watch anymore. Watching someone else die for her? And now the exit from the hunter's house was right in front of her, and the bright sunlight was blinding her. Once her eyes got used to the sunlight a bit, she froze in horror and screamed, "Saren!" seeing his stiffened figure in front of her. He turned around and asked in a trembling voice, "Hui-kyung? Why? Why did you come up? Why didn't you listen to what I told you?" His stomach was pierced by the spear and the puddle of blood underneath him was getting bigger by the second. Hui-jun, who had been waiting for them here and had set up this ambush, stood behind the backs of his warriors and smiled smugly. He was sure that Hui-kyung had shown up too late to make a difference, and had only made it easier for them all to find her. And this lizard man is no different than dead already. Hearing his taunts, the wounded Saren shouted for him to shut up. Hui-jun was even surprised that the lizardman still had the strength to speak. But it didn't change anything, absolutely. Therefore, he snorted contemptuously and gave his next order. "Ignore the lizard man, just kill Hui-kyung." His warriors immediately rushed to the attack, hoping that the mortally wounded lizard man was no longer a threat. How wrong they were. A moment later, Saren's eyes lit up with lightning, and his movements were equally lightning fast. He knocked out 2 warriors with his tail and stopped the spear of a third with his hand, and all this while in another hand he was already holding a sword. Hui-kyung didn't even have time to take a step and froze when Saren reminded her that she was supposed to run away. After all, she herself knows it was the right thing to do, right? Then he grabbed the shaft of the spear with his tail and broke it in one motion. At the same time, he was still trying to get an answer from Hui-kyung, asking, "So why did you make the wrong choice?" But she didn't know the answer to that question either. And she only said that sometimes people make choices. Wrong choices even when they know they are wrong, even if it ultimately leads to their own destruction. Saren looked at her and realized that it was not just a trait of humans, but of all intelligent beings. The warriors standing opposite them had their weapons ready, but did not rush to attack, hoping that the lizard man would lose more blood and become less dangerous. So when Hui Kyung asked why Saren felt that way, he could calmly tell her that the leader of his tribe had told him to protect her, but had not asked him to risk his life for her. Perhaps that was where they were both similar. It seemed that there was nowhere to retreat, and they would have to accept death together. Meanwhile, one of the subordinates approached Hui Jun and whispered a message in his ear, which was just as well. It turns out they had found something, and now he was going to use it. To his hesitant warriors, he announced that whoever killed the lizard man and Hui Kyung would be rewarded with a full cart of silk. To his surprise, even that didn't work on his usually greedy subordinates, and they still stood still. Then he lost his patience and shouted, "How long are you going to suffer from a single wounded warrior? Put your human pride on the line and kill them." To this, the warriors objected to him, saying that that guy's spirit is too ferocious to simply be called a warrior. There's also a rumor that he's a chosen one. Even though he's not at his best condition right now, Hui Jun just called them idiots and said it was impossible. If he was the chosen one, there'd be no reason for him to hide his powers until he gets a spear piercing his back. While Hui Jun argued with his warriors and tried to get them to attack, Saren looked around carefully for a possible way out. All he could see was a flimsy-looking wall with salt crystals in it. Surely somewhere behind this wall was one of the passages of the salt mine. So he quickly came up with an escape plan. He had to explain it to Hui Kyung quickly, so he told her as soon as he gave the signal, she would have to run straight to the right. When Hui Kyung looked over there, she saw a solid wall and asked why she should run there. Saren explained that unfortunately Hui Jun is right, and he really isn't the chosen one. But that also doesn't mean he's a low-level warrior at all. In fact, he's the second-best warrior in the entire Lizardman tribe, but no one remembers the second-best warrior. When finally the Hui Jun warriors decided to attack, Saren reminded Hui Kyung that she should run to the right. She yelled one last time in panic that it was just a wall. Saren was already running towards the wall and assured her that the wall wouldn't be there for much longer. Hui Kyung trusted him and just ran after him. Saren smashed through the wall like a battering ram, which could not withstand the power of the lizard man and crumbled into pieces. Hui Kyung could hardly believe he had succeeded, so she just kept running after him. But her surprise was hard to compare to that of their opponents. They didn't understand how this could happen at all. The first to regain consciousness was Hui Jun, who shouted furiously, "Damn it! Go after them! Catch them!" With a battle cry, the warriors ran after the fugitives into the breach. But finding the fugitives in the dark and confusing tunnels was no easy task at all. Soon Hui Kyung and Saren broke away from their pursuers and could afford not to run. Of course Saren's blood trail was visible, but so far they were lucky that the pursuers hadn't thought to follow it. However, Saren's loss of blood was the real problem. He was getting weaker by the minute and was already having to lean on Hui Kyung to keep moving. For now, she kept asking him to hold on just a little longer and then everything would be fine. They would surely get out of this damn mine together. With each step, Saren found it harder to move and breathe. But Hui Kyung continued to lead him onward, hoping to get out as quickly as possible. Soon, the walls of the mine in front of them began to narrow, which could mean that they were not far from an exit or a dead end. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before Hui Kyung froze in despair. It was a dead end. They had no luck finding a way out, and they had been going in the wrong direction the whole time until they hit a dead end. To make matters worse, Saren's bleeding hadn't stopped and the spear tip was still in his stomach. Looking at this, Hui Kyung asked, "Wouldn't it be better to pull out that spearhead and get some rest?" But Saren assured her that was a very bad idea. If they pulled out the tip thoughtlessly, he would lose even more blood at once and the bleeding would only get worse. But they would both have to rest, because in their current condition, they would definitely not get anywhere else. While saying this, he accidentally touched the spearhead and groaned slightly at the sudden pain. But he was used to the pain. What surprised him was the crying and sobbing on Hui Kyung's part. Saren asked her in surprise if she was crying, but she didn't even want to talk about it and asked him not to even ask her. But Saren insisted because he wanted to check and find out why she was crying. Was it because of him? Surprisingly, she admitted that yes. All because he's dying, and anyway, what does he want to check? That she can't even cry? She was already hoping that things would change and she wouldn't be alone all the time. After all her life before it was like this and bad things happened to everyone around her. Saren, seeing her despair, assumed she thought it was all because of the curse. But she was wrong, and he was determined to prove it to her. To do so, he asked her to think back to how many dangers they'd encountered together in the last 3 weeks. There had been many, but all of them she had overcome and survived. Most people would call it not a curse at all, but another word for it. Luck. Yes. Luck. She's not cursed at all. And there's plenty of proof of that. Saren asked if she remembered the day they had first met. Then he noticed something interesting when he climbed down from the cliff to pick up the silk. It was then that he noticed something was wrong with the wagon. Such a breakdown was quite strange. It looked like someone had deliberately broken the part that held the axle, even though she had borrowed the wagon from Gyeojung before the Battle of the Airs broke out. Just like this case, Saren assumed that something similar had happened in the past. For example, he found it suspicious and strange that in the past, the bathroom floor had broken so easily under the weight of an ordinary child. So it seemed logical on Saren's part to assume that none of this was an accident, and that someone had been deliberately trying to kill Hui-kyung since she was a child and make it look like an accident. She should have realized it herself. Someone had been purposefully trying to take her life for a long time. Suddenly, as if resonating with what Saren had said, a chilling voice sounded inside Hui-kyung, one that told her that she knew it herself too. More than that, she even knows deep down inside who tried to kill her. Soon the pursuers found them after all, by the trail of Saren's blood. It was no surprise, and it was bound to happen sooner or later. Their hiding place was revealed and illuminated by the light of torches. Shouts of warriors were heard, and they surrounded the only exit. Soon, the footsteps of Hui-jun were heard, who gloatingly stated the fact that the lizard man had already lost a lot of blood judging from the trail of blood drops. But the most important thing is that this place is deep in the salt mine. A dead end. And here the runaways can't break down the wall and escape like before. Just what he needed. A perfect trap with no way out. A trap they've driven themselves into. He was not going to wait any longer and immediately sent all his warriors to attack, ordering them to kill the runaways immediately. Saren and Hui-kyung prepared to take their final battle and meet their fate. Hui-kyung thought that at least now she would not blame the curse for anything. And if she died, it would be entirely her own fault. Saren wasn't going to die yet. He told her he was still waiting for her luck. Maybe this time she'd get lucky in the face of death. But the Hui-jun soldiers weren't waiting. They were already charging towards them with a battle cry. Suddenly, a bright blue flash blinded the attackers. A shining ball of lightning appeared right in front of them. No one realized what was happening. Not the soldiers. Not Saren and Hui-kyung. Not Hui-jun. Everyone froze in place. The light formed into a flashing sphere that cast shadows behind the people in the cave. Those who had good vision were able to make out a strange, square-shaped creature fluttering in the air. And as the mine began to dim, all the other people were also able to see the creature. An electric stingray, a demonic spirit called Buzz, Pez, or Pazd. But his name said nothing to everyone in the cave, and they all stared at him questioningly. Just as the bright light disappeared, everyone heard a voice coming from within their hearts. Buzz didn't hesitate and turned directly to Saren. In a voice shrouded in mystery, he announced, "Saren Mule, you have been chosen." When Hui-jun's soldiers heard the word chosen, they hesitated and did not dare to move forward, much to the annoyance of their commander. Hui-jun was shivering with anger. He was so annoyed that when they were about to deal with that pesky Hui-kyung, everything went wrong again. Moreover, he didn't understand why his soldiers were so stupid and hesitant at a time like this. He wasn't going to stand for it, so he shouted at his soldiers to move and not even think about regretting that they didn't make an alliance with the Gnolls. And why were they so scared of that flying thing anyway? If they're so scared to go over there, they should take a bow and arrow and shoot it. Where are the archers? Buzz turned around at this noise and saw Hui-jun and his soldiers. To him, they were only minor hindrances. Finally, Saren came to his senses and realized who was in front of him. However, he did not seem happy at the news that he was the chosen one. There were 5 chosen ones in the black-scale lizardman tribe: Rokrak, Jaeol, Ur, Owen, and the Stargazer. No one knew why, but until now, they had been the only ones receiving God's special grace. So the fact that Saren was chosen meant that the chosen ones would become 6 or someone had died. So Saren asked which of the chosen had died. Buzz was in no hurry to answer, and his light only dimmed instead of flashing. The Stargazer died a few days ago, but Saren had left the tribe before that, and it was news to him. While he was recovering, Buzz looked back at Hui-jun and the soldiers and said, "There are annoying things here. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about them because I am only here to carry out God's will." Saren was not upset and assured him that he would deal with them later, but before that he had just one question. "Why him?" Buzz replied, "God chose you himself, so I don't really know the reason. But you probably think you deserve it. Aren't you the second best warrior of your tribe?" At those words, Saren slowly nodded. Then Buzz shone brightly and assured that now he could no longer worry about these enemies, because he will now act on behalf of God, and when he does so, he can borrow God's power, and he will have that power starting now. Buzz glowed as he disappeared, just like when he had appeared. The salt mine then returned to darkness save for a few lit torches. For a moment, everyone was still standing in place, not believing what was happening. But Hui-jun's shout quickly brought his soldiers to their senses. He demanded them to attack at once since the monster had disappeared, and they should even dare to delay, but they had already missed their chance. With the power of the Chosen One, Saren could easily deal with them. He started with the spearhead that was still sticking out of his stomach. With a cry of pain, he gripped it tighter and his eyes glowed with lightning. Hui Kyung heard cries of pain behind her and asked Saren what was going on, but he assured her that everything was fine. In one firm motion, he pulled the rest of the spear out of himself, and quickly burned the wound with a lightning bolt to stop the bleeding. The soldiers continued to run, not even realizing that their opponent had already managed to heal the mortal wound, and the pain he still had left only made him stronger. Looking at the soldiers running straight to their deaths, Saren assumed that they didn't even realize what had happened. And in that case, he'd just have to make them understand. Saren spread his right palm open. Electric lights began to flash between his fingers, and in a moment, the lightning bolts came straight at the soldiers attacking them, filling the mine and leaving them no chance of survival. Now the hunters were the victims. A blinding flash erupted from Saren's hand, striking the corner of the salt mine. All the soldiers running at them were struck by the deadly lightning, and their screams of pain filled the cave along with the smell of burning flesh. Hui Jun saw this and was scared to death. He had never expected that this wounded and cornered lizard would be capable of such a thing. In an instant, an entire squad of soldiers was defeated, and the survivors fled in panic to save their skins. Hui Jun shouted in panic to the soldiers already fleeing even faster than him to retreat, for this lizard man was truly the Chosen One. Together, they hurried to the exit as fast as possible. Saren was trying to catch his breath. Using the power of the Chosen One was not an easy task, especially for a wounded lizardman. Hui Kyung was amazed by this incredible strength, but she was also concerned about Saran's condition. Despite his assurances that he was fine, it was hard to believe him. But what was easy to believe was the destructive power of the Chosen Ones of their black-scaled lizardman tribe. Hui Kyung didn't understand why, with such impressive power, their tribe still didn't dare to openly fight the tribe of cut ears. Siren himself didn't exactly know the answer, but he guessed the reason. Now that he had used this power himself, he could definitely say that this power could not be used indefinitely. Because when he used it, it felt like some type of mental power was being consumed. Now he understood why Owen always smoked cigarettes after using this power. Hui Kyung was still worried about his health, but he persisted in assuring her that he was fine and just a little tired. But that was okay, because now that he had cauterized his wound and stopped the bleeding, he felt much better, and he was ready to go. Then Hui Kyung was not going to stay longer in that cramped mine and was determined to see the sunlight again. They had a good chance of getting out of the mine because today she was luckier than ever before. However, as they made their way to the exit, the obstacles did not become less, and they were blocked every time by a Huijun soldier who jumped out from around the corner, and they had to deal with him. Of course, with Saran's new strength, they had no chance, but they kept trying. When their attempts failed, even fleeing didn't save them. So they pushed onward and onward, leaving nothing but roasted corpses in their wake. All this was watched by Hegemony, who could barely contain his rage at seeing their success. He just couldn't afford to let it go on any longer and was determined to stop them. Yes, it wasn't exactly part of their arrangement with Nebula, but he himself didn't want things to go that far. Now he had no choice but to act. To stop them, he decided to summon an animal under his control, a saber-toothed tiger, to deal with them and bring him victory since Hui Jun couldn't do it himself. Soon, Saren and Hui Kyung froze with surprise and fear. It was hard to believe, to encounter such a creature so deep in the mine. At the sight of a giant muscular saber-toothed tiger, they were confused and did not even immediately realize what it was. But the tiger did not hesitate and with a growl continued to approach them. Saren was the first to come to his senses and quickly jumped forward, covering Hui Kyung. He had only one question. What was the saber-toothed tiger doing here? But there was no time to look for an answer to that question. The tiger suddenly leaped at him and Saren only had time to activate his Chosen One power a second before it would be too late. A flash of lightning illuminated the mine, and the saber-toothed tiger fell dead at the feet of our heroes. Looking at his corpse, Saren could not stop wondering how the saber-toothed tiger had crossed the walls of Automation Castle and managed to enter the salt mine. And the most important question was why. In search of what he came here? That was something he had no way of knowing. However, Hui Kyung was no longer surprised at anything. She was already dizzy from everything that had happened this day. With her already happened so many incredible things that now she already thought that absolutely everything can be, and this tiger is just another proof of it. Finally, they approached the exit of the mine. They were in no hurry to get out of the mine, but they would be vulnerable to another ambush, and Saren was almost certain there would be one. But they had no other choice. All they had to do was be ready. Saren went first so that he could meet the danger if anything happened. As expected, the ambush was here, and two of Hui Jun's soldiers were ready to attack from a very unexpected direction. In order for them to succeed, Huijun himself decided to play the role of a cornered victim. He played it skillfully, saying, "Damn it, so in the end, you're cornering me like this." Huikyung completely fell for his tricks, and without suspecting the ruse began to ask him who he thought started it all. Huijun knew what to say to her. He reminded her that she was the one who had brought the wicked lizard into the castle. The fight for inheritance should have only been between siblings. He was just furious at what she had done, for he was sure that Automation Castle would not be okay if his heir got his place, thanks to the power borrowed from outside. Humans would then be pushed aside, and certain species and races that helped the heir get the throne would simply swallow up the humans of Automation, making them their servants. Huikyung was shocked at such accusations. Did he really think that she was the one to blame for everything? In his opinion, this was the perfect moment to attack. He had absolutely no interest in who was right, so he shouted for her to shut up and die. At the same time, it was a signal for the soldiers who were sitting above the mine entrance to attack. But their attempt was a failure. Saren didn't fall for Huijun's tricks and remained vigilant the whole time. His sword movements were lightning fast, and he slashed his opponents before they even reached the ground. Seeing his soldiers die, Huijun was furious at how resilient and tough this lizardman was. According to his calculations, it should have collapsed from exhaustion long ago. Now it was time for Huikyung to make her stand. She pointed directly at her sneaky brother and said that he was the one who was an idiot who didn't know the problem and didn't understand anything. She believed that Automation Castle was a castle that lives off trade, but not to get involved with nearby forces means that he's voluntarily isolating them. It would damage their castle and limit their options. Besides, a lot of nearby forces want to take control of their castle, and if he was smart, he'd probably think of using those guys. Finally, Huikyung was sure that she wasn't a wuss like him or father, and she would be able to put the Automation Castle on the scale and obtain something even greater. Huijun wasn't surprised by such loud words and only pretended to be surprised. He knew where to push to make it hurt more and told her that she not only looked like a monster but also thought like a damn monster. He'd never thought of her as his sibling. The way he smugly sat himself down proved that he hadn't used all his tricks yet and had at least one more trump card up his sleeve. And so he did. At the same moment, an arrow flew at Huikyung's back, but somehow, miraculously, it was stopped by a swirl of air and flew well above Huikyung. She was really lucky today, perhaps. Everyone was shocked. Huijun, Saren, and Huikyung herself. No one could figure out what could have saved her from the stealthily fired arrow. Looking at the arrow picked up by the wind, Huikyung wondered what it was. Or who is it? A curse or luck? Suddenly her mental questions were heard by someone, and a chilling voice answered her that it was neither one nor the other. He is more complex than that. He is a spirit of demonic magic, and he is not the only one of his kind. They have survived long enough to lose memory of the Creator and their time of birth, and they live beside old temples of fallen gods, or in old blood like hers. He isn't the curse that she thought he was until now, and he's not a misfortune that haunts her either. He sees infinite probabilities for the future and can make the choice that will be most suitable for the situation and bring the most benefits. Moreover, he can manipulate those probabilities. Having familiarized herself with the image of her curse, Huikyung discovered a demonic property called probability. It was also recognized by Nebula and Hegemony, who were watching the scene through the system window that appeared in front of them. Hegemony was just shocked that what had haunted Huikyung all her life wasn't a curse. This turn of events was definitely not something he had expected. In contrast, Sunwoo knew this very well, and seeing his reaction started laughing at him, asking, "Why would I choose a cursed entity?" Hegemony was simply in a panic and couldn't believe what had happened. He frantically opened system windows with information about Huikyung to check. He didn't understand how it could be that the character's explanation clearly said that she was a cursed entity. In fact, it turned out that it wasn't information about Huikyung, but about a spirit with a demonic property that was in her. Had Nebula purposely confused something in the description for him? To such accusations, Sunwoo only replied to him that he would have found out for himself if he had looked closely at the description of Huikyung. It had always been like that, and even if he wanted to, he couldn't do anything about it. Hegemony could only curse and blame his inattentiveness. After calming down a bit, he asked Nebula a question. How did he know then that Huikyung had a demonic property? The answer to that question was simple, and he honestly answered that from the beginning, he didn't know about it either. And thought also that there was some unlucky curse on Huikyung, all because of the countless unlucky-looking incidents that happened to Huikyung. But then he realized that it wasn't just bad luck, but failed assassination attempts that people were organizing against her. Sunwoo realized this when the washroom floors broke. It was because the headmaid had destroyed the floorboards before Huikyung came. However, even though things seemed hopeless to her herself and she thought she couldn't even go to the washroom in peace, everything was not as it seemed at first glance. Even in situations where she could have gotten stabbed or buried and died, Huikyung would leave perfectly fine. Sunwoon then realized something as he watched her and noticed fireflies that shouldn't have been there. The thing inside Hui Kyung wasn't the worst curse in the whole game of unluckiness, but the demonic entity with property of probability, which could be incredibly lucky if used well. Hui Kyung's horns were only an outward demonstration of what was inside, but her appearance didn't matter. What mattered was that having an entity with demonic properties under her control was a great advantage. And right now, Sunwoon was as close as possible to extending his influence over Hui Kyung. After hearing her story, Hegemony decided that there was nothing to worry about the missed opportunities and suggested forgetting about the whole thing because it didn't make any sense. Suddenly, Hegemony laughed and declared that he had won. All thanks to the fact that he had summoned a saber-toothed tiger back then and had been waiting and stalling shamelessly all this time. To this, Sunwoon only replied that it was good that he knew he was shameless. But what does he mean when he says he won? Hegemony thought he won because Nebula still couldn't finish off Hui Jun. And now it's too late. Because at this very moment, the Lord of Automation Castle, Hui Seo, has returned. And with him, a whole army. As soon as he saw his children, he immediately ordered them to stop and end the slaughter. Hegemony cheered and laughed. He was sure it was over. Since the castle lord is back, the family needs to stop fighting. But to his surprise, Nebula did not get upset at all, and said that everything was still undecided and it was not clear who would win. Hegemony was sure that to end all of this chaos, Hui Seo will choose a successor and probably right now. And just like that, he was also sure that Hui Seo would definitely choose Hui Jun as his successor, since Hui Jun has similar political alignments as his father. And in that case, Hui Kyung won't be able to do anything. Not only is killing Hui Seo absurd, but no other families will recognize her either. Even Saren's help and support will do nothing for her. But Sunwoon thought otherwise. He was sure that the premise on which Hegemony had based his reasoning was wrong. So it was no wonder he had come to the wrong conclusion. Sunwoon didn't understand why he was so sure that Hui Seo would choose Hui Jun over Hui Kyung. Well, now everything was going to be resolved, and Hui Seo's final decision would show who was right and who was wrong. Hui Seo approached his children, and as expected assured them that there was no need to fight any further. He was going to decide who would be his heir right here and now, unexpectedly. But before he could say anything else, Hui Kyung asked her father to listen to her. Hui Seo paid close attention to her and remarked that her horns had grown a lot, and she responded by remarking that he had shaved off his beard. These meaningless phrases were just the calm before the storm. Finally, when Hui Seo asked what she wanted to say, she gathered her thoughts and blurted out a question that shocked everyone. "Why did you try so hard to kill me?" Even Hui Jun was shocked at this news. He had no idea that his father had tried to kill Hui Kyung long before him. Surprisingly, Hui Seo didn't even try to talk back. All he did was ask her when she found out about it. Hui Kyung, with an expression too cheerful for such a moment, told him that she found out about it a long time ago, but she lied to herself and ignored it, just because she didn't want to believe that the father she loved so much was capable of such a thing. She knew that the truth was that the reason he was trying to kill her was because of her mother, who had died while pregnant with her. Moreover, the truth was that this brand of a curse that bothered her whole life was a lie that Hui Seo had made up. She couldn't wait to hear him justify himself. He started by remembering her mother, Ryo. Her body was already too weak to bear a child, and as bad luck would have it, she had the flu. She died of exhaustion from the strain of childbirth. Ryo was too special to Hui Seo, and her loss was an unimaginable pain for him. It was at that moment that the word curse started rolling around in his head, and then he couldn't get rid of it, not knowing who to blame for the death of his beloved wife. So then he chose to think that Hui Kyung and her horns were the curse that led to the death of his beloved Ryo. It was the easiest thing to blame it on her. The position of Castle Lord was full of never-ending difficult days, and then he believed it was Hui Kyung who had taken away the one thing he held precious. That was why he simply could not let her stay alive and be a living reminder of his loss. Upon hearing this, Hui Kyung declared that she had figured out for herself what she was going to do, and he could now do as he wished now. Hui Jun intervened and rushed to his father's side, warning him not to make a decision swayed by guilt. The fate of Automation Castle would depend on his decision. Hui Seo reassured him that he had nothing to worry about. Even though he himself is old and tired when it comes to such an important decision, he will decide purely with his judgment as the Automation Castle's lord. Besides Hui Seo, he knew that this is the last decision he can make with free will as a pawn on this chessboard for gods. So he decided to announce his choice to everyone. Everyone froze in anticipation, even the so-called gods. Hegemony began to pray to his gods, while Nebula watched him skeptically and asked if he really thought it would work. They are gods themselves, by the way. But beyond that, something down below caught Sunwoon's attention. There, Hui Kyung's demonic essence was about to reveal itself. That inner spirit was scrutinizing Huiseo's every move and word and explaining everything that was happening to Hui Kyung. Judging from the way Huiseo opened his mouth, he was about to say Kyung, so she would probably be the next owner of the automation castle. But the spirit wondered why she didn't look happy. Then she explained that her father was trying to escape, even if he doesn't realize it himself. But in the end, he chose to rid himself of the guilt. If so, the rumors will spread within the castle that the castle lord gave his position away out of guilt to his daughter that he had been trying to kill. Huijun's side will spread the rumors like that. And if so, people will doubt her ability, saying she got the position out of luck. The 4 families of the automation castle and citizens will not follow her, and even the position of castle lord she will receive will be at risk. That's why Hui Kyung couldn't afford to be chosen by her father as his heir. She had to get that position herself, and she was determined to do so, no matter what it cost her. Hui Kyung decided to act here and now while she had the chance, and the first thing she told her father was that she had changed her mind, which surprised him. She had been thinking about the situation for some time, and now she was sure that no matter what her father's plan was, she thought she should become the lord of the castle. And that was why she had asked her father to entrust her with the position of castle lord. Such insolence and self-confidence at such a crucial time was a surprise to everyone, Saren included. But it was Huijun who was most resentful. He was not going to stand aside, and immediately shouted to his father to pay attention to the fact that she was threatening him right now. But Huiseo with a quick gesture ordered him to shut up. He was well aware of where this was going and understood his 2 children, their positions he had heard. But still he wondered where his daughter got the courage to threaten him in front of all those soldiers. The answer was simple, and it stood right beside Hui Kyung. It was Siran. He immediately displayed a small portion of his newfound strength. And that was more than enough to scare the soldiers and make Huiseo look a little differently at the situation he found himself in. Hui Kyung decided it would be right to point out the obvious, and said that as they could see, this lizard man was one of the chosen ones of the Black Scale tribe. Hui Kyung couldn't say for sure if he could kill everyone here, although the soldiers had no doubts about it. But what she was certain of was that Siren would have the strength to kill Huiseo and take her to safety. Huijun immediately started accusing her of lying, and that lizard man is already injured and tired. In such a state, he is not capable of something like this. However, Huiseo had his own opinion on the matter. He could clearly recall the strength of the chosen ones, and especially their leader, Rakrak. He is a fearsome beast, strong and cunning. And Huiseo was sure that this lizard in front was just one of the pawns Rakrak had deliberately placed in automation, to ensure for himself that the lord of the castle would make the right decision. Right for Rakrak, of course. Still, Huiseo did not want to give up so easily and reminded his daughter what she already knew very well. Automation Castle is special, and if he dies without appointing an heir, the council of the heads of the castle's great families will find someone within the castle and appoint him as the next lord. Hui Kyung wouldn't want that situation to happen, but still if it did, she would get the support of the Black Scale tribe. And with the help of their power and warriors, she will be able to completely devastate the castle. And all she will have to do is to be the only person inside the castle, and then no one will have any doubts who is the real heir and lord. Huijun couldn't contain his indignation at what he heard and called Hui Kyung a low trash who finally stopped hiding his dirty nature after all. He still had no way of understanding how she could even say such a thing. Meanwhile, Huiseo remained silent and weighed all the factors to make a decision. He had no choice but to make a difficult one. There was nothing Huijun could do to change that. Huiseo stepped forward and solemnly declared that as the current Lord of Automation Castle, he was giving up his position for Hui Kyung. Right here and now. From that moment on, Hui Kyung was considered the new Lord of Automation. This was a painful defeat for Huijun. He just couldn't believe it had happened and sat on the ground out of helplessness. His brilliant plan had failed, and all the sacrifices he had made were in vain. A few days later, life once again stirred on the streets of Automation. Vitality seemed to be flowing within the Automation Castle for the first time in a while, all because the turbulent air fight was over. Not only that, people began to feel that the very atmosphere in the castle had changed. Trade with other creature species had picked up considerably, and more traders began to come from afar. At the same time, all 4 main families inside the castle remained quiet. They seemed to have accepted the changes that the new lord of the castle had introduced. The only one who didn't like it all remained Huijun. He still couldn't get over the fact that something so absurd was happening in the castle. How could a person who sticks around a lizard be the castle lord? He couldn't find an answer to that question for himself. He had had enough of sitting idly by for days, and as darkness fell, he decided to act. Under the cover of night, Huijun equipped his horse for a long journey and prepared to leave this place and gather power somewhere else. Once he had found the right power, he intended to return and take his revenge. But his wet dreams of revenge were interrupted by a lizardman who came out of hiding place. Huijun immediately tensed up and asked, "Who is that coming this way?" Siren stepped out of the shadows and immediately picked up on the fact that Huijun was probably going somewhere far away. But of course, he wasn't going to say where he was going, and only stated that it was absolutely none of the lizard man's business where he was going. Siren agreed with him. It was none of his business, and he wasn't going to stop the defeated heir. He only reminded him that whether he stayed here or not, he still wouldn't be able to accomplish anything. Huijin considered all of this as empty threats and curses and set off. How wrong he was to think that he would just be allowed to leave. Someone wise had told Siren that sources of trouble like Huijun shouldn't be allowed to exist whether he was close or far away from Huikyung. And to be honest, Siren agreed with that wise man. He picked up the torch and gave the tentative signal. At the top of the automation walls, he was perfectly spotted. The goblin assassins knew their job well. When Huijun ran out of the gates of automation, he didn't even hear the sound of death rumbling right above him. He was never meant to leave the walls of automation, one swift movement from the goblin, and his head had already fallen from his shoulders. Now the proof that Huijun could never cause trouble again was in the goblin's bag. From the outside, it looked as if the rider had calmly continued on his way and nothing had happened. But in reality, it was already a headless rider. This was a fat point in the hegemony's defeat. He knew perfectly well that he had lost unconditionally. Even Sun-Woon was surprised at how calmly the usually emotional hegemony accepted his defeat. But he had his reasons. He realized that one who does not acknowledge their losses cannot grow. Apparently, this wasn't his first failure in this game. Of course, it was frustrating to lose, and hegemony was upset. But he had no choice but to admit that it was Nebula who had won in this contradictory prophecy, which was obvious. In the end, as surprising as it was, the hegemony acknowledged his loss cleanly and left. And he didn't leave on his own. He took his tribe of gnolls with him and led them to the other side of the continent, guiding them to the far west. It seemed that hegemony was not really worried about the failed prophecy and was ready to face all negative consequences and events. Now the paths of hegemony and Nebula had diverged again, but that didn't mean they wouldn't meet in the future for another battle, perhaps the final one for one of them. Watching all of this, Sun-Woon immediately figured out the hegemony's plan. He was going to make a military march across the continent, capturing weapons from the continent's inhabitants. By taking such a step, he must have been confident in his tribe's fighting strength. Now that the hegemony had left its original location, a vacuum was created, which Sun-Woon was able to use to increase his forces in the territories previously inhabited by the gnolls. They used to occupy the North Shore regions and the peninsula's southern half. These were all coastal territories, and Nebula saw an opportunity to utilize them. Besides that, he still had the ocean small domain that the lizardmen had taken over from the frogmen. The serpent who had this small domain being originally a freshwater creature, it hasn't even had a chance to use it properly. Well, it wasn't all that urgent and could be thought about later. Right now, Nebula had to meet the new lord of the castle. Huikyung was just in the right state of mind, tired after a busy day of business. She had fallen asleep right on her desk. It was the perfect moment for Sun-Woon to appear to her and guide her in the direction he wanted. Huikyung was awakened right in her sleep by a small blue firefly. As soon as she woke up, the firefly returned to its true owner. The mysterious hooded figure of Nebula stood right in front of Huikyung. She immediately realized who was in front of her, the blue bug god she had heard so much about from the lizardmen. Huikyung bowed in reverence to the god whose followers she had received so much help from. She knew this was just the beginning, but she had nothing to thank him for. She had started various businesses, but they had all failed and had little to offer the god. All she got in response was silence. But then the firefly that was in Nebula's hand shone even brighter, and turned into a small ingot of iron. This piece of iron was what Nebula had shown Huikyung. It was his message to her today, though for her, it was not clear at all what it all meant. This ingot of metal looked like a piece of iron that automation merchants used as currency, but that fact didn't help her understand what they wanted her to do, and it made her feel very stupid. Did God really want money from her? Suddenly, a lizard's hand touched Huikyung's back. She immediately turned around fearfully and saw Saren in front of her. What was he doing here? And where did the blue bug god go? Everything around her began to blur, and she began to realize that it was probably a dream. Finally, Huikyung woke up, and real gravity quickly helped her regain consciousness. After falling out of the chair, she had no doubts. It really was a dream. After something like that, it was definitely necessary to take a walk and clear her mind, which Huikyung did. Walking around, she pondered whether this dream was just a dream or some kind of revelation. She didn't have even the slightest idea how to help the blue bug god. Though if he was showing her an ingot of iron, what should she do with it? She wanted to earn trust points from the blue bug god, but to do that, she still needed to find out what the revelation in her dream meant. Not far from her, a merchant from distant lands was surprised at the high quality of silk sold in automation. The lizard-man merchant really didn't see this as a surprise. He had already sold silk of this quality at the local market several times before. But this traveler was from the far western lands, and this was the first time he had come to automation. The western lands are located in the direction of the setting sun, and no one from there could come to automation before because the Knoll tribe blocked their way. The lizardman merchant really hadn't seen creatures of that race here before and asked if he was going to buy silk or not. The troll was satisfied with the quality of the goods and was going to buy all the silk the merchant had. He had a full bag of iron currency for that purpose. As soon as he showed the iron, the lizardman immediately agreed to make a deal. Such a quantity of high-quality silk must have been expensive, so the troll showed a whole bag of ingots. Of course, that was more than enough. The merchant was about to declare the deal a success when suddenly Hui Kyung shouted to him to wait. As for the troll, she told him to leave his money where it was now. Hui Kyung explained to him as peacefully as possible that she was sorry, but this guy was supposed to do business with her first. The merchant didn't understand what was going on at first and wanted to object, but one look at Hui Kyung was enough for him to realize that he'd better shut up. The troll had no choice but to turn around and leave. Only then did Hui Kyung answer the lizardman's questions and tell him that if he continued to do business this way, he would be in even more trouble. She pointed to the silk and asked if he thought it was wise to sell it at such a low price. No matter who she is now, she is also a merchant, so she just couldn't look at such a bad deal. Then the merchant told her that he had come here with Chief Rakrak and brought the silk in a wheelbarrow, so transportation was not difficult. Usually he sold the silk at the higher price, but this time due to the large quantity he found it profitable to sell everything even at a lower price. But Hui Kyung was in complete disagreement with this logic. If he continues to think like that, he won't be able to do business here. Doesn't he know how rare the products he trades in are? She had noticed such behavior not only from him, but also from the rest of the merchants from the Black Scale tribe. Hui Kyung had made it clear to him that he shouldn't undercharge, especially when he was selling high-quality luxury goods like silk. And there was one more thing he had missed when making the deal. Iron. She had an iron ingot in her hands, just like the trolls were. The merchant had to watch carefully as Hui Kyung explained to him what the scale was. On the scale, she placed 2 pieces of iron. One was the one normally used in Automation's castle, and the other was from the troll. Hui Kyung was going to compare their weights. Whichever one was lighter would go up. The lizard-man merchant was watching everything with interest. And as you might have guessed by now, the piece of iron brought by the troll was lighter. That's why he should check the weight of the iron before he traded it next time. Behind him came the voice of someone. The scale that Hui Kyung had shown him seemed to be a very useful item. It was Rakrak himself, and he also asked Hui Kyung to compare the weights of a few more pieces of iron. She happily agreed. It was not for nothing that their automation scales were considered the most accurate. After the measurements, it was immediately clear that this metal was different from regular iron. Then Rakrak told her that this iron was obtained from ancient ruins. It is of excellent quality, but it has one very significant disadvantage. It is very difficult to melt. The best forges of the Black Scale tribe had given up out of helplessness. That is why Rakrak came here, hoping to find a solution to this problem within the walls of Automation Castle. Rakrak wanted to find a way to melt this iron and turn it into a weapon. At that moment, Hui Kyung realized what her dream was about. The Blue Bug God had given her the task of helping Rakrak with this difficult challenge. Of course, Hui Kyung replied that she could do it. However, she later realized that she had been a little hasty with this statement and had said it too confidently. Now she wondered what would happen if she didn't keep her word, and now said she couldn't do it. Would her reputation as Lord of Automation fall from that? By the way, there was a reason Hui Kyung was so confident in front of Rakrak. She was relying on the blacksmiths of Automation, who were considered the best in the area. When they looked at the iron that Rakrak had brought, they assured Hui Kyung that they could make weapons out of them. However, they had a problem in the process. If it was the will of the castle lord, the blacksmith was willing to work, even though it was difficult. This damn metal proved to be too unyielding to be crafted. After heating up the workpiece, a skillful blacksmith could usually get it into the desired shape in 10 hammer blows. But with this metal, he barely succeeded after 40 blows. The blacksmith could barely make one spearhead after working hard for half a day. After that, he was too tired to continue, and that's why he couldn't make the next one. Then Hui Kyung asked why not take a break and then go back to work. But the blacksmith assured her that wouldn't work either. If the forge cooled down, he would have to reignite it and would waste too much charcoal. Hui Kyung then suggested using more people, but that wasn't an option either. They would need several years of hard training to become useful in the smithy. Hui Kyung realized that was the end of her ideas, and recognizing her defeat, she praised the blacksmith for his good work and sent him off to rest. The blacksmith left, and Saren came in his place. He saw how Hui Kyung was worried about those iron pieces and advised her to just be honest with Rak. Hui Kyung was hesitant. She had told him so confidently that she could help, and now Saren was suggesting that she admit that she was not a useful partner. Saren assured her that's exactly what she should do. The Rak he knows is benevolent. To make it clear, Saren presented her with a picture of a smiling Rak who was willing to accept any failure of Hui Kyung. But it didn't help much. Hui Kyung was too proud to accept her defeat. She wasn't going to give up so easily and asked Saren to follow her. Saren was just coming over to teach her writing, but she offered to do it later. She had something that needed to be confirmed. They headed down a dark hallway together. There they were met by a mud soldier. Hui Kyung revealed that it was made in the innermost areas of the inner palace. Although mud soldiers traverse the automation castle themselves, anyone can't handle them as they wish. But that's not why she brought Saren here. What she wanted to show him was actually behind the heavy stone door. As soon as she opened it, bright sunlight hit her in the face. Before their eyes was a waterfall that was forcefully spinning a giant water wheel. Saren was mesmerized by this sight. He had never seen anything like it before. Hui Kyung explained that it was the entire castle's water reserve. And thanks to the fact that it's inside the inner palace, there's no need to worry about enemies aiming for it either. Right now, there's one particular detail to focus on. That wheel underwater that generates an incredible amount of power without rest. A machine that doesn't get tired. Though none of the humans knew how the automation castle used that power. Hui Kyung had brought Saren here to tell him about her plans for the future. She wasn't going to limit herself to using this power just to process metal pieces. She wanted to use this power to completely change Automation Castle. But to do that, she needed help, so she asked Saren for it. Of course he was willing to help her. A few days later, a group of lizardmen arrived in Automation at Saren's request. Hui Kyung didn't hesitate to show them her blueprints. She suggested making a new water path at a higher position than the current one, because it's a way to add new wheels without weakening the current waterway. Still, she had doubts and asked for advice on whether it would work. The familiar Yahello came to her aid. She had already become the head of the engineers of the Black Scale tribe thanks to her sharp mind and intelligence. Yahello had already had time to look around and replied that judging by the amount of water flowing there and the formation of the wheels, she thought that energy production was possible. But to accomplish such a large-scale project, Hui Kyung would need a lot of people. And of course a lot of money and hardwood, which doesn't grow in this area. Even though Yahello had inexplicably licked Hui Kyung's horn, she replied that Automation Castle definitely had enough money. But Yahello replied that it's not just a matter of whether or not she has enough money. The problem is that if Hui Kyung uses so much money and then doesn't get enough obvious and useful effects in return, it could cause people to resent her. Her position is already weak, and if she wastes the castle's funds, she will definitely get flood of criticism. The question is, will she be able to handle it? Yahello's words made her think. That evening in her office, this question never left her. In such a difficult situation, she turned to her inner spirit and asked if he knew the future. Unfortunately, the spirit replied that he was not a spirit of prophecy. What he can know or can change is simply the moment in front of her. Hui Kyung guessed that would be the answer. Still, she asked him to hear about the future she was pondering. She was going to leave the axle of the first water wheel empty and save it for the next lord to be appointed. The second water wheel she was going to connect to the blacksmith's mechs. If they just have enough charcoal, it'll create a bloomery that will never get extinguished. The third water wheel would be connected to a hammer that would be able to shape the blacksmith's workpieces. The fourth and final water wheel she was going to connect to a millstone so that people could process an impressive amount of grain into flour. Hearing her thoughts, the spirit replied that it looked pretty good, but that wasn't enough for Hui Kyung. She needed to be sure. This the spirit could not guarantee her. It was a future he couldn't see. He only said what he thought. Well, in that case, she was even willing to take the risk. Hui Kyung as well as the spirit thought it was a nice idea. She decided that she would start building water wheels after all. So construction has begun, but not as smoothly as Hui Kyung had hoped. Construction came with numerous challenges. Water wheels and workers kept falling over. On top of that, several times they got scammed by material suppliers. But all that was nothing compared to the most painful thing. When the work was almost finished and 3 water wheels were installed, it turned out that the 4th one could not be installed. Now that was the real challenge. Gaojung suggested that there was a space calculation error in the design. It's a pity, but he suggested just building everything with 3 wheels. Because if they needed to install a 4th wheel, they would have no choice but to start over. Gaojung assumed that there was no other choice. In that case, Hui Kyung told them to start over. They were shocked. How could she order such a thing? If they started over, they would have to dismantle what they had already built and then start over, and that would take twice as long. On top of that, there was also the problem of the workers they had hired. Hearing all these pathetic excuses, Hui Kyung turned to them with a threat and asked, "What's the problem? This is a promise with the blue bug god. Are they really willing to arouse the god's wrath on Automation Castle the moment it just started to revive?" Finally, Hui Kyung shouted, "Say this to everyone. As long as I am awake and alive, I will keep my promise with the blue bug god at all costs and show you the completed water wheels." Sun-won, watching this of course, couldn't remember when he told her to build exactly 4 wheels. Although, that didn't surprise him in the least. The human race had always been like this. After all, unlike lizardmen, who are a bit blunt and tactless in comparison, humans live extremely goal-oriented lives. Thus, using the blue bug god as an excuse, the build period was extended. But the other automation families weren't very resistant to this, all because they were benefiting from the ongoing construction and the flourishing trade and business. The reason being, as the construction workers stay and more goods circulate, the scale of the commercial district expands, eventually returning benefits. Finally, under Sun-won's close supervision, after countless twists and turns, construction was completed. And the 4 water wheels, the most advanced structure in the world, was born in Automation Castle. Hui Kyung was more than pleased with the result. So were the lizardmen who helped her. The water wheels were moving and all the mechanisms were working. The automatic smithing hammer worked with some incredible power, as did the other mechanisms. Now the Automation Castle will surely become a place about which travelers will say the following: "I have been to many places, but I have never seen a place as remarkable as Automation Castle, famous for its ironwork that is trusted and used all over the continent." Hui Kyung was satisfied and only apologized to the blue bug god for using his name for her own purposes. But still, she believed he would understand her, and would appreciate her plan. She was right. Sun-won was just as pleased as she was. Thanks to Hui Kyung, he was able to improve his iron-making skill to level 2. His civilization had now laid the technological groundwork to produce higher-grade iron. Also, his civilization was now able to smelt steel to create more durable and long-lasting ironware. In addition, now iron made in automation and marked with a special tag became the first base currency to establish itself on the 3rd continent. Even that was not the end of it. The writing system developed in automation called Chung letter system also became the mainstream on the 3rd continent. Thus, the technology of the civilizations under Nebula's control developed much faster than the average development speed of the other players. How could he even be angry at Hui Kyung for this? This was the exact reason why Sun-won had chosen humans as his second race. As a result, Automation Castle prospered more than ever, and began to attract races that had never been here before. Elves, for example, who strolled through the castle and were surprised by the sound and sight of the continent's famous water wheels. One of them knew that the giant water wheel inside the city grinds grains. The other could not imagine how huge it was that the sound of its operation reached all the way here. A lizardman trader intervened in their conversation and corrected them that the water wheels were not only used to grind grain, but also to make weapons for the tribe of black-scale lizards. But the lizard was not particularly interested in talking. Since the travelers had come here, they probably wanted to buy high-quality silk, right? After feeling the goods, the elves were surprised by the quality and immediately decided to buy it. They were going to pay for the goods with iron ingots, not the ones made by automation, but their own. They assured that they were of the highest quality, made of iron that is found only in their region. But the merchant, having learned from his own experience, was not going to take their word for it and took out a scale. As could be guessed, the elves' iron ingots were lighter than the standard. Their iron was of the lowest quality. In that case, the merchant was not even going to sell them anything. He would not accept such low-grade currency and was not going to trust such cheats as them. Of course, the elves were surprised by this refusal. As a solution, the merchant suggested they go and exchange their iron plates for those issued at the central exchange of the Automation Castle, and then come back, because he could not sell them anything until they had normal currency. The elves tried to resist and kept convincing him that he was making a mistake and missing a great opportunity to make a good deal. And anyway, someone who sells a lowly piece of cloth shouldn't be so power-tripping. It was a mistake. As soon as the merchant heard this, his patience ran out. He shouted at them to get lost since they don't know how much quality silk costs. Hui Kyung was watching from the sidelines like a professional spy. She liked that this lizard man ended up being a worn-out merchant. But what she didn't like were those 2 elves. She wasn't used to seeing that race in her castle, and she wondered where they were from. So she decided to observe them and see how they did business. The elves approached one merchant, then another, and so on. And then Hui Kyung realized who they were. These elves are cunning tricksters. They're just targeting naive people or new businessmen. The way they're just targeting anyone who they get their hands on. It's more like they're hunting pushovers. A couple of scammers like this, Hui Kyung had never met before. And the big question remained, where the hell did they come from? Meanwhile, Sun-won received a private message from one of the players. He was surprised. No one had written to him before. The message was from a player named Eldar. Based on his name, Seong-un immediately assumed that this was a new player he hadn't met yet and was most likely controlling the elf race. During the issue with the hegemony, they resolved their conflict regarding Automation Castle by talking, as our hero needed to resolve all issues outside of the battlefield. As far as he knows, right now the elven forces are located far away on the northern coast, so why would Eldar want to talk to him? Still, Seong-un lacked information regarding the entire northern coast that was located beyond the wasteland. And if the conversation was trivial, it would even be useful for gathering more information. So he decided to accept the request. He was immediately greeted by the melodious voice of an elven woman. She introduced herself as Eldar, the goddess of the elves. She had only one question for him: was he the god of this small castle and these people? Seong-un, looking at her, couldn't understand what was going on and what was wrong with her. Is she really an RP player? I'm sure you know it, but just in case. RP or role-playing. Immersing oneself in a role within a game. That's exactly what that elf was doing. Such players are quite rare, but still Seong-un was willing to talk to her, and he greeted her as well. She liked the beginning of their conversation and immediately picked up on the fact that Nebula was better than Hegemony, at least in his manners. Seong-un was surprised that she knew Hegemony. As it turned out, she knew him too well, and she was the one who personally drove his barbarian group out of the northern coast. To Seong-un, that sounded doubtful, though it might explain the strange behavior of Hegemony, who was very quick to agree to a contradictory prophecy instead of war. So Eldar had defeated him after all, and he was forced to look for a different place. But it was strange for an RP player to be so strong. Usually, such players are quite mediocre in terms of game achievements. Well, in that case, Nebula decided to find out what she wanted. Eldar was quick to state her demand. She wanted Nebula to pay her tribute, and then she would be merciful and spare his pathetic civilization along with him. It was a rather self-righteous demand on her part. There was no point in talking to her further, and Seong-un immediately cut off their communication by blacklisting her name. He wasn't going to pay tribute, of course, and didn't even respond to her request. The Eldar base was located on the northern coast, and it was almost impossible to get to it for reconnaissance with insects. Seong-un wasn't going to go there himself either. It was dangerous, and there was no telling what might have happened to his civilizations during his absence. But Eldar was also limited in what she could do as well. Just as Seong-un knew little about Eldar, who turned out to be just another guy who had chosen a female avatar in the game, neither did he know much about Nebula. That was probably why he had sent his elf scouts to Automation Castle, since he couldn't use his little domain for that either. There was also a chance that there were no birds or insects in his small domain. And then Eldar was very unlucky. However, considering Eldar claimed to have driven the hegemony away, he shouldn't be underestimated. He probably has an ace up his sleeve and support that he relies on. In that case, Nebula needed to quickly prepare for war. But before that, he was going to see what the other players had. Meanwhile, at Automation Castle, Hui-kyung had uninvited and unexpected guests. A delegation of elves had come to negotiate with her. It was headed by Leaner, the president of one of the largest trading companies of the elven civilization. He wanted to meet personally with the Lord of Castle Hui-kyung and no one else. He had come to apologize and resolve the problem that Hui-kyung had banned elves from trading in the castle because of the fraud of the two she had overseen. And they didn't come empty-handed. They had prepared a valuable gift. When Hui-kyung opened it, she was nearly blinded by the glow of a large precious diamond. According to the elf, this artifact had been found in ancient ruins. The elf hoped she would accept the gift and forgive them for their mistake, which would not happen again. Hui-kyung closed the box back up and said it was an outstanding artifact. However, she threw it on the ground and said she was rich enough already. Did he really think he could bribe her with it? Such an artifact meant nothing to her. Which could not be said for the elf, who immediately rushed to pick up his treasure. After making sure the artifact was safe and sound, the elf breathed a sigh of relief and asked how much she wanted then. Hui-kyung wondered. The elves had never come from the northern coast before this. So why were they so eager to start trading with automation now? Has the situation really changed? Finally, Hui-kyung answered them that if they wanted good relations with her, they shouldn't even think of bribing her. Instead, they better stick to the law and fulfill the restrictions imposed on them. The elves had no choice but to agree, but it didn't end there. Hui-kyung also offered to buy them statues of the blue bug god if the elves wanted to earn her favor. To this, the elves replied that they believe in the dancing shadow god, but Hui-kyung was not the least bit confused by this. She didn't care. So she suggested to the elves to believe in two gods because it will double the blessings. In fact, they had nothing to lose, so they could safely try it. A few weeks passed, and there was a knock at Hui-kyung's office. It was Siren. He had been given a message from the great Hassadian elf chieftain. In the message, he demanded an apology. He claimed that the last time she met with the elves, Lord of Automation had demanded his subordinates to convert and insulted them. Hui Kyung was shocked by such statements. It was nonsense. She had done nothing of the sort. How annoyed she was by these elves with their arrogant looks and twisted personalities. Siren didn't understand the sarcasm and took her words literally, making her once again remember who she was dealing with. Hui Kyung decided to outsmart the elves with their own weapons, and used the fact that the elves were trying to bribe her in a return message. Siren liked that idea. Thunder rumbled outside the window, which caught Siren's attention. But despite the approaching rainy season, he believed that the messenger from the elves would come again in a few weeks. Hui Kyung also thought it was likely, but she wasn't going to see the elves in person again. In that case, Siren was going to prepare more insults to use against them. But other than that, Hui Kyung had seriously warned him to better prepare for war. The rainy season was over, and the barren lands around the castle had turned green. Surprisingly, no further messages from the elves had come during this time. Life at Automation Castle was peaceful and prosperous. Nothing portended trouble on this sunny day. That all changed suddenly when the guards on the walls noticed something in the distance. An alarm was immediately raised, and a messenger was sent to Hui Kyung. An army was heading towards them. Elven soldiers were already close, and they clearly did not come with peace. Led by their leader, Hasadian himself, riding a reindeer. A scout reported to him that Automation's castle was right in front of them. Well, Hasadian was pleased to finally see the home of these foolish and shameless people. He admitted he was a little flustered when the dancing shadow god sent an oracle of punishment. But now, to be honest, conquering this castle didn't seem like such a difficult task to him. Confident in his strength, he commanded his army to prepare to attack. They rushed forward without waiting for any worthy resistance. The Hasadian army consisted of 300 professional warriors, and it was not only their leader who was confident of victory. Their god Eldar also believed that such an army would be more than enough to conquer this small castle. Though the walls of Automation's castle are high, after all, they're made of mud, and those walls are defended by 150 soldiers at best. Compared to the bows of the elves, which can shoot at 80 paces, the bows of humans are weak and pathetic. Hasadian, as well as his god, was confident that now they would be able to make that damn Lord of Automation castle bow down before them. Sun-Moon was also watching. Well, the elves had asked for it. Now the civilizations of Nebula would give them a decent fight. Hui Kyung was not taken by surprise and was already giving orders to proceed. Unfortunately for Hasadian, things didn't go according to plan from the start. Another soldier ran up to him and reported that something strange was happening in the canyon in front of Automation. The Automation Castle soldiers lined up there in a formation in the shape of a magic circle. There were about 70 soldiers, and since they were there, they must have been aware of the elf attack beforehand. But Hasadian was worried about something else. Why only 70 soldiers came here? Where were the other half of the Automation defenders? He didn't have to ponder that question for long, as more pressing problems were approaching them from behind. Those approaching forces were blocking the elves' escape route. And to Hasadian's surprise, it wasn't humans. Instead, it was an army of lizard men riding cockatrices, and leading them forward was High Chief Rakrak himself. The elves could not believe how it was possible that lizard men and humans could be allies. Equally surprised and confused was their god. A notice appeared before Eldar. The clash of civilizations had begun, and the opposing tribe also had faith. Eldar could not understand what was happening. Humans were supposed to be the only opponents. Why were other civilizations suddenly involved? He immediately contacted Nebula to express his outrage. He wanted to know if the Lizardmen tribe belonged to Nebula's ally. Sun-Moon only sighed irritably and asked him why he didn't look at the list of players on the location before contacting him. Really, RP players are not the smartest. When Eldar opened the local player list, he found that there was only one player present, Nebula. Then Eldar asked incredulously, "Isn't Nebula the god of humans?" The answer was simple and sad for Eldar. Sun-Moon was both a god of humans and lizardmen. Eldar couldn't believe it. How was that possible? He couldn't believe that at such an early stage of the game, any player could control two species of creatures at once. The elves were terrified, and even their leader's shouts and demands not to be deterred, because they still had the advantage in numbers, didn't help. Hasadian did not give up and ordered the vanguard to prepare to defend themselves against the humans, and the rear guard to turn around and prepare to attack the lizard men. But their troubles didn't end there. Another 70 human soldiers with bows were at the top of the canyon. They didn't hesitate for a second, and simply showered the frightened and disoriented elves with a rain of arrows. Hasadian ordered to dodge while fending off some of the arrows, but it did little to help his less able soldiers. Meanwhile, the lizardmen were approaching from behind. Before the elves could recover from the attack from above, they immediately began to be pushed back from behind. Some even began to flee. Hasadian couldn't let them do that, and shouted to them to get ready to meet the lizardmen, maintaining the formation at the same time. But the elves, scared out of their wits, were barely able to do that. especially when some horrible creatures riding other even more horrible ones were running straight at them. To their surprise, however, there were no weapons in Recap's hands. Instead, he extended his hand towards the elves and it glowed with a blue light. The group of elves didn't even have time to move and realize what was about to happen when the electric flash was reflected in their frightened eyes. The elf it hit was instantly turned to ash while the others were disoriented. Recap took advantage of this moment to approach with spear in hand and mercilessly slaughtered the weak elves. The rest of the lizardmen followed his lead. The cockatrice cavalry was merciless, and soon the cries of dying elves for salvation and mercy filled the canyon. They were helpless in the face of a superior force, and began to run for their lives. Hassadian tried to stop them, but all his calls for the soldiers to stay and fight only shook the air in vain. He even reminded them all that they must bring the will of the dancing shadow god, but that didn't help at all. The elven soldiers fled and were afraid to even look back. Hassadian did not give up and continued his fruitless attempts to stop them to save him. The elven army had already lost their morale, and the best solution would be to end things quickly now. Recap said they will charge once more, and this time, the electric stingray demon pest would help them with that. It flew right over the battlefield, and the rest of the lizardmen saw it as a sign from the chieftain, calling for their attention. As everyone looked at him, Recap gave his last order for the day: kill everyone. It was all over for the elves. Eldar had no choice but to admit that he had lost. Sun-Woon was surprised that he gave up so quickly and didn't even try to intervene and use his divine power to descend on the elf leader and grant him superpowers. Eldar was forced to admit that even if he had done so, he had inevitably lost and had only once again shown that Nebula was stronger. As the losing side would have it, Eldar wondered what the winner wanted. Sun-Woon wanted only 3 very important things: information, skills, and resources. When Eldar heard that, he was indignant that he wanted everything at once, and it looked like a robbery in the middle of the day. Then Nebula told him that he didn't really need all 3 things. But anyway, if Eldar doesn't try to obey and come to our hero's side, his elves will have a hard time living. While he thought about it, Sun-Woon decided that the most important thing at this time was information about the northern coast. Not this guy. The silence lengthened, and Nebula asked again if Eldar accepted his offer. It was a hard decision to make, but Eldar even thought it might be profitable for him. He had lost almost 300 warriors here, and after that it would be hard for him to survive as an independent player with what he had left. On the other hand, Nebula is already playing with 2 species of creatures, so if he has to choose sides anyway, let it be someone very strong, like Nebula, for example. Eventually, Eldar changed his mind, and while a few minutes ago he was claiming that he was being robbed in the middle of the day, now he took up his RP stuff again and solemnly declared that he had been touched by the mercy of Nebula, god of humans and lizard men. Eldar was willing to give everything to him: information, skills, resources, and anything else he needed. Further playing his role, he even pretended to cry, asking for forgiveness for his past arrogance. It was a mystery to Nebula what was wrong with this guy all this time, but it didn't matter, because he was ready to share everything he knew about the North Coast now. Now Sun-Woon understood what had made Eldar change his behavior. He wanted to make an alliance. Eldar made no secret of it, and as a sign of his sincere intentions, he began to tell Sun-Woon what he was eager to know without demand. On the northern coast were the civilizations of 3 players: Solongos, Lim Chunsik, and he himself. Together they formed a loose alliance there without systematic support for each other. The player known as Solongos controls a rare race of centaurs. Sun-Woon knew something about them. Although the centaur race had the advantage of being cavalry soldiers, they also had their disadvantages. For example, it was very difficult for them to increase their population quickly, and they consumed a lot of resources. Sun-Woon wouldn't want to rule such a race, but at the same time it was quite annoying when it had to be opposed. The other player was Lim Chunsik. His nationality was clear from his name. However, that wasn't what mattered. It was the fact that he managed to subdue the ogre race and found a way to compensate for their shortcomings. Ogres were known for their incredible strength, but had a low intelligence level. Sun-Woon was well aware that the average ogre IQ value was 10. However, Eldar told him that Lim Chunsik had succeeded in raising their intelligence using the blessings of his small domain. Nebula pondered. Indeed, the blessings of the small domain are not limited to just physical stats. It was because of this that Sun-Woon was able to give people different blessings. If Lim Chunsik was able to obtain a good small domain and give its blessings to his ogre race, then even such dumb creatures might well be able to develop a fairly advanced civilization. It's a gamble, but it's not a bad play. Sun-Woon concluded that of the 2 future opponents, Lim Chunsik was stronger than Solongos, and then he would probably be the one that Hegemony fought with. But his guess regarding Hegemony's opponent turned out to be wrong. Because Hegemony shared his borders with Solongos and Eldar, he never had to fight Lim Chunsik. So Hegemony realized that he couldn't get a fair one-on-one battle. He figured out Eldar's plan to hold out and gather forces so they could attack Hegemony together and march south to set up a new base. Eventually, Hegemony had to flee the area and ran into Nebula. Eldar confirmed his hunch and continued with his story, perhaps because he was no longer useful after Hegemony had disappeared. But soon Lim Chunsik began to demand an exorbitant amount of offerings from Eldar. It was difficult for Eldar to meet his demands, and that's why he demanded offerings from Sunwoon as soon as they met. Now Nebula realized that Lim Chunsik had chosen Solongos as an ally over Eldar, probably because Solongos ruled the nomadic centaur race, while both the elven and ogre races are settlers, and the strength of the settlers depends on the size of their land. So it's not surprising that the situation turned out this way. Lim Chunsik saw Eldar as a competitor for land. Pointing to the fertile lands that belonged to Eldar, Nebula warned that Lim Chunsik would surely seize them someday, and there would be nothing good for the elf god in that. Sunwoon couldn't say exactly when that would happen, but one thing was certain: Lim Chunsik would be the first to betray the alliance with Eldar. On the other hand, he would try to keep the nomadic centaur race among his allies, at least for the near future. For our hero, this scenario was problematic. He didn't want a strong force to appear in the north, and to prevent that Eldar could help him. For him himself, it would be an advantage. Eldar was ready to happily agree to all the terms, but he wasn't sure he could provide enough help after losing his main forces and high priest in battle. Fortunately, he still had his small domain at his disposal. Based on the name the elves called him, Dancing Shadow God, Sunwoon quickly guessed that she had gotten a small domain of arts at the beginning of the game. Eldar was surprised that Nebula knew so much about the game. Well, in that case, Eldar could be useful to our hero. He called him closer and whispered his plan in his ear. Eldar was shocked and asked if what he heard would really work, and how would the other players react to it. A few days later, far away in the mountains to the north, a group of centaurs stood on top of a mountain. Among them was the leader of their civilization. He called a prophet to him, and asked him to tell him the story he had been spreading among these lands for the past few days. The prophet assured him that this prophecy would soon be fulfilled, and in the near future, a true king will descend upon all these lands. When the king arrives, the world will be reorganized. Those who used to have power will lose it, and those who traveled freely in the land will lose their way. The centaur leader ordered him to tell him, "Who is this king the prophet speaks of?" The centaur prophet started from afar and explained that the king is the one before whom everyone bows his head. Even the strongest tribal leaders dare not stand with their heads up in the presence of the king. The centaur chief thought this was ridiculous. He thought that the king the prophet was talking about was a god, but the prophet quickly dismissed his assumption. There are no gods in these lands. They are high above, and the king will rule the lands below, and only the gods will be above him. The cocky centaur chief then liked that prospect, a person who only has the gods above him. The prophet must have been describing someone like he himself, but the prophet had to disappoint him. The prophecy was not about him. Then he suggested that perhaps it was about one of the lizard men that everyone had been talking about recently. But even here he did not guess correctly. Yes, lizardmen are fierce and feared by all, but because of their physiological characteristics, they will not be able to take the position of king on the northern shore. The one who will be the true king is the giant, the acting leader of the ogres. With his overwhelming size and immeasurable strength, he will sit on a throne made of stones. He is stronger than the centaurs and wiser than the elves. Hearing such a prophecy, the centaur chief was furious. He could not believe that a centaur prophet could say such a thing. How could the high priest of the ogres Kijin become king, and how could the prophet even dare to suggest that the centaurs would serve him? But the prophet still stood his ground. He said what the gods had revealed to him. The centaur chief couldn't stand it. In rage, he shouted that the long-eared prophet was wrong. At the same moment, he struck a crushing blow. Only blood spattered his rage-blinded face. He, the great Tamaridu, would never bow to any but the gods. All this was watched from above. Eldar had done as Nebula had ordered him, but he still had his doubts. Even though Tamaridu looked angry, in the end he probably wouldn't believe in this prophecy. Well, in that case, all Sunwoon had to do was to make the prophecy come true, and soon all would become clear. From that day on, Tamaridu had nightmares every night. It was the same thing over and over again. He was standing in front of a high mountain that he kept trying to climb. With each step, he wondered why. Why, no matter how hard he wanted to and how hard he tried, there was no way he could climb this mountain? Why are these northern mountains so high and impregnable? Why was it that just as he was about to reach the top, one obstacle after another appeared? As if to suggest to him that just as he could not climb this mountain, he could not become a king, no matter how much he wanted to. Finally, he woke up. This recurring nightmare was like an obsession, and to get out of this obsession, Tamaridu was sure he had to become king. But who would know the name of Tamaridu in these wilds? In the end, it seemed he had no choice but to watch the ogre Kijin become king. His musings were interrupted by one of the guards. The centaur chief had visitors. Tamaridu immediately ordered them in. After meeting them, he sat on his throne and thought. Today, 2 more people had come to him with their prophecies. The first was a green-eyed elf. His prophecy was the opposite of what the already dead prophet had said. That elf said that he had heard a prophecy that the ogre leader Kijin would become king, but the elf was sure that they should change that, and that the real king should be Tamaridu. After the elf came the man from Automation Castle. He immediately said that he had heard the news that a centaur king had appeared, and so he immediately brought tribute to the new king to trade in his lands. They were all talking about the king. But why was Tamaridu beginning to worry even at the words that came from ordinary mortals rather than revelations from the gods? And now his attention was drawn to the last, 3rd guest, a lizardman who came from far away. It was the familiar lizardman from the black-scaled tribe. Owen. Tamaridu asked in surprise. Did he also come here to say that he should become king? But Owen wasn't so straightforward, and instead replied that he didn't know anything about the future. But if Tamaridu wants to become king, then he is here to tell him to give up. Of course the centaur chief didn't like that and asked, isn't he worthy to be king? And does he need the recognition of the other chiefs to do so? Then Owen asked Tamaridu if the other chiefs recognized him. Well, the humans and elves said he was good enough. What about the lizardmen? Owen wasn't sure. However, what he could be certain of was that Rockrak would recognize any Tamaridu title. He would tell him to take any useless title he wanted, and then Rockrak would personally show him what real power was. Tamaridu didn't even know how to react to that. Was it a threat or a recognition? However, Owen went on and advised the centaur chief not to become king for his own sake. Now this was already completely clear and did not please Tamaridu at all. Owen explained to him that it was not a matter of qualifications or ability. It is a matter of whether or not your god confirms you're becoming king. Tamaridu froze in horror. Does the rushing without hesitation god not want him to become king? Owen said it was just a guess, but just as there is a hierarchy among the tribes below, there is also a hierarchy among the gods. And the rushing without hesitation god of the Centauruses must be below the endlessly looking down god of the ogres. Such statements made Tamaridu's eyes blaze with anger. He grabbed his axe and rushed to Owen, intending to do to him what he had done to the prophet. But he stopped. Owen stood there, not even moving, smiling in the face of death after insulting the centaur god. Though Owen didn't think so, he was only talking about the hierarchy among the gods and didn't understand why Tamaridu was so angry with him. If he wanted to unleash his rage, he could direct it at another god who was suppressing his god. With a shudder in his hands, Tamaridu realized that this might be true. Then that nightmare he has every night could be a negative revelation. Maybe that way the god, knowing his feelings, instead of giving him the revelation that he should become king, rejected him. If Owen's words were true, then what should he do? Owen was ready to give him a clue, and to do so, he told him how black-scaled lizardmen sometimes went against the orders of their commanders if they thought it was right and necessary. Perhaps Tamaridu should follow their example and disobey his god to benefit him in the end. Tamaridu just has to do what his god doesn't want him to do, for the benefit of his god. Having said that, Owen left, leaving the centaur leader alone with his thoughts. Soon, Tamaridu himself was sure he was destined to become king. In the name and for the good of his god, he must choose a path that God does not desire. Nebula and Eldar watched the whole spectacle. The elf god could not believe that his small domain could be used in such a way, and wondered why he himself had never known about it. Nebula answered him that any tool could be useful depending on how it was used. Moving the hearts of people is all because of art. Murals, sculptures, prophecies, all of it. In this way it was possible to influence species that were under the control of another player, directing them in a different path than the one their god had planned for them. Solongos would now have to go through many hardships due to the interference of Nebula and Eldar. Still, Eldar wondered if it would be enough. While it was possible to intervene in the affairs of the species and quarrel them, but as for the gods, it seemed unlikely to Eldar. This was where Sunwoon was in disagreement with him. Anything was possible. Solongos must be well aware of the limitations of roaming civilizations such as the centaurs. Gradually, there would come a point when they would find it difficult to stand up to the dwellers with their technology, fortifications, and larger populations. And when that moment comes, the centaur civilization will be absorbed by the Lim Chunsik. Solongos knows this, so there is a high probability that he will not actively stop the leader of his civilization. That was Sunwoon's plan, but the reality was a little different. As soon as the centaurs gathered their troops and camped near the ogres, Solongos showed up to meet Lim Chunsik. He immediately began to apologize for the behavior of Tamaridu, who was out of control and disobeying. Lim Chunsik assured him that everything was fine. It was his own fault for ignoring this elf and not capturing him a long time ago. Now this scoundrel had dragged another player into this. Solongos hadn't counted on this outcome either. Now Lim Chunsik has started apologizing for the fact that Solongos had to confront hegemony, and he didn't help him. And now, soon Tamaridu and Kijin will fight, and if Tamaridu dies, Solongos will lose an important high priest. Suddenly Solongos stated that he wasn't apologizing because of that, and Lim Chunsik misunderstood him. Solongos was apologizing for his Tamaridu, who would kill the High Ogre Chief Kijin. Of course, Lim Chunsik didn't see it that way, and instead of answering, he laughed smugly. Solongos responded in the same way, and only the laughter of these two self-righteous gods echoed over the mountains. Soon the day of truth came, among the snow-capped mountains of the north coast. The clatter of hooves filled the whole area, and Tamaridu, at the head of his army, commanded his army to advance. Tamaridu had high stats like all centaurs, 58 points of strength and 17 points of intelligence, making their race strong in the beginning. But as time went on, their advantage only diminished as other civilizations developed. Tamaridu was sure that this path would decide once and for all who would become king. One of the centaurs warned the leader that there were goblins ahead. Tamaridu saw no problem with this. Crushing the common slaves of the ogres did not seem to be a difficult task. The goblins were numerous, but it was not difficult for the centaurs to chop them to pieces and trample the ones that remained with their hooves like beetles. Soon the screams of the dying goblins began to fade. They didn't stand a chance, but a much bigger problem loomed ahead. From a ravine littered with large trees, the ogre leader Kijin appeared. He knew the centaurs would come this way, and only laughed at Tamaridu's foolishness in hoping for a surprise attack. Soon, the rest of the ogres showed up as well, scaring the centaurs who had just dealt with the goblins. Tamaridu commanded his warriors to retreat, but damn it, it was too late. The corpses were constricting the centaurs' movements and preventing them from turning around. The ogres immediately seized the opportunity. They began to smash the helpless centaurs with their massive hammers. A single blow was enough to turn a rare creature into a bloody mess. Tamaridu had to admit that ambushing after blocking the enemy's mobility was a smart idea. But it wasn't enough. All those cheap tricks wouldn't work against a skilled warrior. Immediately, two decapitated ogres fell to the ground after Tamaridu's quick movements. Now they were left one-on-one, and the centaur chieftain was confident that he could defeat Kijin in the name of his god and could become king. The huge figure of the ogre chieftain occupied almost the entire canyon, and he was just seething with rage. How dare Tamaridu betray him? Now the stupid centaur would regret it in afterlife. With battle cries, they rushed at each other. At one point, Tamaridu managed to knock the hammer out of the ogre's hand, and wanted to strike with his fist, but the ogre easily dodged it, and grabbed the centaur by the throat. It was a dead grip from which it was impossible to escape. Tamaridu tried to fight back, but it was useless. That bastard ogre was too strong. Everything was over, and the centaur's body fell to the ground. For the last time, Kijin only reminded him that he told him that he would regret it. Meanwhile, Eldar and Sunwoon were watching everything from their screens. Eldar had thought that the centaurs would do much more damage to the ogres and hadn't expected such a quick outcome. Of course, he didn't think the centaurs would win, since the ogres are the strongest race. But centaurs are a rare race and good fighters, and he would like to see more from them. Sunwoon didn't react to all his musings until he asked him directly if lizardmen were his main strength. They are vulnerable to the cold, and in that case, how would they be able to stand up to the ogres? Nebula once again sighed. His ally was too stupid. He had told him before, his lizardmen would not stand up to the ogres. Eldar seemed to have heard that for the first time and asked what he meant. Sunwoon was too lazy to explain it to him, and instead he asked Eldar what his rank was in the game. Eldar had nothing to be proud of, and he didn't really want to say, but still he had to share that he was about 3400th in the leaderboard. That explained a lot to Sunwoon. Such a rank was a very questionable result. He used to think that players for the role of gods were chosen based on their ranking, but it seems he was wrong. What were the conditions for being chosen then? The players weren't chosen randomly, were they? In any case, even such an ally was better than nothing, and Sunwoon asked Eldar if he would continue to cooperate. Even such a simple question caused him difficulty, so Sunwoon just assumed it was a yes. This of course annoyed Eldar, who didn't even understand what Nebula was saying. Meanwhile, their opponent Lim Chunsik wasn't sitting idly by either. He was diligently gathering information. In the end, he found out all the basic information regarding Nebula. Even the ID looked familiar to him. In the past, he had seen him at the first place of the player rank too often. There were rumors that this crazy bastard didn't stream or compete, and just only ate and played. It seemed like a strange coincidence for Lim Chunsik to meet Nebula so early. But he himself seemed to be luckier than Nebula. He had the ogre civilization at his disposal, combined with the small domain of birds, which gave him the blessings of the wisdom of an owl and the intelligence of a crow. He knew that Nebula had the insect small domain and the lizardman civilization at his command, and both of them were vulnerable to the cold. When winter came, Nebula would have no choice but to try and wage a short-term battle. By then, Lim Chunsik would have all the preparations completed. In addition, he himself was not easy. In the past in the game, he was in the top 20 in ranking, and now he was confident that he had everything he needed to defeat Nebula. Time passed, and the weather worsened. It was getting colder by the day, and Lim Chunsik kept wondering when Nebula would attack. Something didn't add up. Suddenly, something caught his attention. Smoke and fire far away in the mountains, right where the elf village was located. He couldn't even think of an idea why the village was burning. What's going on? Did that bastard dare to do such a thing? And use the slash and burn tactic? Lim Chunsik was right. This is the tactic Seong-un used, also known as the scorched earth tactic. It's when you destroy all the areas your opponent can occupy to block his supplies. Eldar himself probably used this tactic as well. However, he didn't like the fact that his elven village was on fire, even though Nebula had previously evacuated all the elves from there. Eldar had indeed used such tactics before, but usually not this early in the game. Seong-un was in agreement with him. It usually didn't work in the beginning, but this time they got lucky. The location of Lim Chunsik's possessions on the northern coast made him vulnerable. He couldn't produce enough food himself, so it had to be bought or captured. And now that the Lizardman tribe controlled all the trade at Automation Castle, the ogres would not be able to buy food supplies there. And once the battle started, the ogres were probably planning to rob the elves or buy food from them. But now, that will be impossible when the elf village is completely ravaged. In addition to all this, the weakness of the ogres is that they eat a lot. They probably don't have enough supplies to survive the winter even now. Lim Chunsik made the mistake of not realizing who is actually vulnerable to the cold. Also, Seong-un got lucky with Eldar. He is part of his luck. Usually for Scorched Earth strategy you have to burn your own lands, but it just so happened that this time it was enough to burn the elves' territory. Now they just need to wait, and the ogre civilization will definitely not survive the second winter. Everything happened just as Nebula had predicted. A year later, the ogres suffered from hunger so badly that they began ravaging allied goblin villages. The goblins fled in fear, but the starving ogres pursued them and caught them. They didn't come here for the goblins' meager food. They came for the goblins themselves, to satisfy their hunger. But most of the goblins had escaped. They were small and agile, unlike the clumsy ogres. Kijin was not pleased to hear this news. His tribe was in a quandary. Now that the goblins had fled and there was no food left in their village either, the ogres would have to endure an even worse famine. Because of this, some have already started fleeing from the tribe, and their numbers are growing every day. Even with all the intelligence bonuses for Chief Kijin, it was hard to think of a way out of such a situation. The tribesmen kept asking if there was any news from God, but Kijin could not answer them. Their endlessly looking down God was silent, and Kijin himself wondered how long they would have to wait for an answer. The ogre village now looked like a ruin. The ogres were dying every day, and so were the goblins, their remaining servants. Lim Chunsik realized that he could not bear it any longer. He had to act, and urgently. He decided to call his former ally Solongos. The centaur god answered immediately and asked what was wrong. Lim Chunsik had only one question for him. How many forces does he have at his disposal? It turned out that Solongos had lost all of his warriors in the battle with the ogres, and now he had almost no one left. Lim Chunsik was shocked by this turn of events, as it had been more than a year since their battle. In that time, it was possible to gather at least a small squad. But the reality was much sadder. After Tamaradu was killed by Kijin, a tribe of black-scaled lizardmen came and conquered the centaurs' lands. Almost all of the centaurs were killed in the escape. They were now scattered in small groups, and their faith level was too low. This made things much more difficult for Lim Chunsik. There was also something else Solongos wanted to contact him for. Recently, the bastard Eldar had called him and offered to become an ally of Nebula just like him. In case Solongos helped them, they promised to spare his life. Lim Chunsik was already preparing for the worst, and wondered what Solongos had told them. The centaur god assured him that he refused, even though he had been considering their offer for some time. After Solongos saw what kind of situation Eldar was in after being submitted, he realized that he didn't want that kind of existence. And even if he and Lim Chunsik had conflicts earlier, they had spent so much time together that Solongos simply couldn't betray him. Lim Chunsik was touched by such loyalty. Also, despite all the difficulties, Solongos managed to gather 10 warriors and the remnants of his faith to try and have one last battle with Nebula. Lim Chunsik himself only wanted to suggest it. Of course, both of them had lost a lot of strength due to Nebula's tricks, but if they tried to have a battle in the open terrain, they would have a chance at a battle among the gods. They will be able to descend on their priests and use their divine powers to destroy the main enemy forces. Because Eldar lost, he He probably lost a lot of his divinity and faith and won't be able to descend on his warrior. So despite Nebula's high level of divinity, he will be outnumbered, and the advantage would be on their side. Lim Chunsik was now confident that it wasn't too late to change things. He would rebuild his civilization after crushing Nebula. So, the combined army of ogres and centaurs moved out to attack. As planned, a spacious valley was chosen for the battle. The warriors of Lim Chunsik and Solongos were exhausted from hunger and wandering, but that didn't stop them. Finally, High Chief Kijin ordered everyone to stop. An army of lizardmen marched out to meet them. Leading them, of course, was Recap Manhua. This was the moment Lim Chunsik had been waiting for. He immediately used his divine power to descend on the ogre leader. He was now confident that they could win. Solongos also followed suit and descended on the leader of his squad. Now they stood shoulder to shoulder. Without delay, they rushed to attack Rakrak, who stood calmly in the face of seemingly imminent death. But Sunwoo was not idle either, and descended on his subordinate. Rakrak now easily dodged Kijin's attack, as well as the Centaur Chief's attack. Already in flight, his eyes glowed with a blue light, and it was clear that this was the end. The end for these two idiots. An electric flash formed in Rakrak's hand. Now even the cocky Solongos and Lim Chunsik realized that they were finished. When it was over, Sunwoo asked disdainfully, how could they think they could win if they just descended on their priests? There was simply no way that Sunwoo couldn't have predicted this. They should have thought about why he didn't run away when he realized that he would have to fight against two people at once. It's obvious that he did so because he was sure of his victory. Now both of these players were sealed and placed in Nebula's hands. If a player dies when he's down, he loses an incredible amount of experience points. And if the player's divinity drops below level 1, then he becomes sealed. In this state, if the one who holds the player's statues destroys them, they will indeed die. If he doesn't, then they will be able to go through a specific process and undo the seal. Sunwoo decided to leave them for later and deal with them afterwards. Right now, it was more important to summarize the results of this confrontation. The battle was relatively easy, and because he was able to defeat the two gods, he was able to raise his level. Now with the 12th level of divinity, he could raise a lot of his stats, even though many of them were already at their maximum level in this period of time. The only thing he lacked in such a measure was points of faith, but that was another matter. Also, after defeating two players, Sunwoo could get one small area from each of his opponents at random. Among the many possible choices, Nebula only received two small areas that belonged to Solongos and Lim Chunsik in the past. What could it be? So they were two small areas, the birds and the swamp. In Sunwoo's opinion, the swamp area wasn't bad. But as for the birds, it was just unbelievable. He had wanted to get one for a long time. Perhaps he could use it to replace the insect blessing he'd given to the lizardmen and humans. After thinking for a bit, Sunwoo decided to use this blessing on the next generations. It would help his progress move forward a bit in the future. Now the three closest players were defeated, 2 sealed and 1 subdued. After that, it was worth thinking about what to do next. Sunwoo should have organized the situation on the continent properly. In the west, according to the information received from the locusts, things were as follows. There are lands of 5 players divided into 3 forces that are at war with each other. They should have been left alone until they start approaching Sunwoo's territories. Of course, all this time they should be monitored with the help of locusts. To the east lies the vast expanse of ocean. It was now worth focusing on dominating the land, so conquering the ocean was not even worth dreaming about. What remained were the north and the south. They were worth capturing before the NPC forces settled there completely. Rakrak could not exist in 2 places at the same time, so it was worth using elves to occupy the north. With elves on hand, there was no need to make his tribe suffer while cultivating barren land. Sunwoo immediately decided to contact Eldar and discuss all the details with him. Far to the north, the elf tribe displaced from their village still hadn't built regular dwellings and were living in tents. They moved from place to place, looking for a suitable place to settle, but never found one. So they moved farther and farther north. The winters here were too long, and the elves needed to work the land to grow food. During this time, they were easy targets for the ogre and goblin gangs prowling around. Doubts crept in among the elves about their god. Why should they suffer so much? They asked the new chief Leonor many times if the god of the dancing shadows had sent any news. Surprisingly, this time his chief did not have to answer them with silence. He actually received a prophecy. Someone was to come from the south and help their long-suffering tribe. Just then, one of the elves came in with the news. A group of humans were approaching their camp. The elves immediately assumed it was a sign of prophecy, which came just in time. Leonor also hoped that these were the ones mentioned in the prophecy and ordered a greeting for the humans to be prepared. The elves lined up to greet the guests. A delegation led by a familiar character arrived. Those horns were quite recognizable. The Lord of Automation himself honored the elves with a visit. Hui Kyung even forgot that she had met Leonard before, all because he had lost a lot of weight since then. The elf leader immediately invited her to enter the tent for negotiations, but learned from her own experience, Hui Kyung was in no hurry to enter. Instead, she called for her loyal bodyguard, Saren. He was to check the tent before the Lord went in, to make sure there were no assassins hiding inside. Leonard had nothing against it. In the plight of the elves, they were not at all concerned with contract killings. When everything was checked, Hui Kyung entered and the meeting began. The first question that interested the elf leader was what brought Hui Kyung here. She was sure that the elf already knew this, since he also believed in the god that she was brought here by a prophecy. Their blue bug god wanted them to help the weak and marginalized. Of course, Leonard didn't like that the elves were considered as such, but now he had to put his pride away. So, in order to help, Hui Kyung brought weapons and farming tools with her, and more importantly, grain seeds that grow well in cold places. Leonard was about to thank her for such valuable gifts when Hui Kyung said she was willing to sell them all cheaply. Poor Leonard didn't know what she was talking about. Didn't her god tell her to help the poor? What kind of strange logic does she have? Then Hui Kyung explained that her god had told her to come and help the elves, but still doing it without profit would be difficult. It sounded strange to the leader of the elves. They didn't have anything of value that they could trade right now. They had spent a lot of their resources and supplies just to get here. In that case, Hui Kyung pretended that she couldn't help in any way and was heading back, since she firmly believes that time is money. But her performance failed and the elf's patience broke. Lena knew well that she would not have come to such a remote land for nothing. Surely the elves must have what she wanted. Hui Kyung only smiled. He had just told her that the elves had nothing, so what could she want from them then? Lena then pulled out and placed a map on the table. Even if they didn't have anything right now, there are rich iron mines in this area, as well as tall trees along with fertile soil for grain. In return for helping them now, Leonard was willing to sell it all for a cheap price just to Automation Castle in the future. Hui Kyung then asked if he really wanted to sell something he didn't have yet, the price of which was not yet known to pay for the real thing today. That was exactly what Leonard was offering, and had personally guaranteed it as the leader of the elves. Hui Kyung thought for a moment and agreed, but with one condition. They couldn't just make a deal on words. Proof of their promise had to be made. Leonard had no choice but to agree, even though he realized he was selling the future of his descendants. No matter how you look at it, the value of iron ore and wood in the future was far greater than what Hui Kyung was bringing now. But if he doesn't make this deal, there may not even be a near future for his people. Surely the dancing shadow god saw this coming and gave him this revelation. God simply could not abandon them to their fate. So the trade treaty or contract was made in blood. And the chief of the elves swore in the name of his god that this contract would be kept no matter what. Hui Kyung liked that phrase and did the same. At the same time, a notice came for Sunwoon. The first credit trade in the third continent's northern shore had been made. Now their world was even wider. Until now, for every creature in the perished world, the entire world revolved only around their own tribes. Other species were just potential threats and wanderers. So no normal trade deals were made with those who could disappear who knows where at any moment. But now that the tribes were settling down in specific places and the wanderers were moving along certain fixed routes, that changed. Tribes began to make agreements and write them in text form. Soon, the value of the intangible and the value of the future, being bought and sold, will become commonplace. Civilizations under Nebula's control have passed the period of simple business transactions and are now beginning to practice economic behavior. Now how will Sunwoon be able to rule such a wide world?